I don't know.
You guys are laughing. All right, here we go. We are live for season 2. I've been waiting to say that. Season 2, episode 23. Have another Army guy in the house. I'd like to welcome Lieutenant Colonel Charles Scheck.
Hey,
Thank you for coming on board. I mean, he's super excited. You could tell here. We're gonna try to peel back the onion here. He's a serious dude. Been trying to open him up. I think we'll get to it. We got some good stuff here to talk about. But super excited to start off season 2. I've been one of our guests came up with that, so it's pretty cool. But I'd like to thank everybody that's been watching so far up here to episode 23, and also thank everybody for all the words of encouragement. It's been a big week for Ports with Patriots. We're officially a 501c3 organization, so I'd like to thank personally all the guys behind the scenes that you don't see that help with that, and obviously all the people that have supported the fundraisers that we've already had, and then hopefully we'll support the fundraisers that we're going to have. It's going to be a good ride, and we're looking forward to it. So thank you all. Welcome, Charles, Chuck. What else? You should have said Chuck, because now I want to call you Chuck, but I'll call you Charles. So no,
my old
cool.
boss used to call me that.
But we'll start off with what's exciting. If you saw one of my posts, it's exciting to have another airborne qualified person here. It took 23 episodes. I was starting to lose hope, but and it's good that I can still make fun of it, because I looked at a lot of pictures. He sent me a lot of pictures, and one of the fun we're gonna have is I was surprised he's not a jump master.
That's true.
So I mean,
there's a reason for that.
You could call me Jump Master Airborne; it'll be all right. All right. But no, that was fun to do. We're excited to have that come aboard. I actually pulled down my wings to give you a hard time about that, because I was like, I think you're, and it's an airborne joke that we're talking among airborne. Like nobody else is probably can get it. He's smiling, but definitely, I should call him sir, but he could call me Jump Master. We'll call it even.
That's fair.
Right.
That's a fair trade-off.
But that's the big things. But welcome aboard. And we'll start off with a quote here. And we'll talk about, if you guys can guess what branch he is. He's been doing a lot of things, so we'll get to what he's currently doing. But the first quote comes from General George Marshall. I need not tell you that the world situation is very serious. It is logical that the United States should do whatever it is able to do to assist in the return of the normal economics in the world, without which there can be no political stability and no assured peace. So, like I said, that's from General George Marshall. And right now, currently, Charles is battalion commander of a civil affairs unit here. So, pulled that from a civil affairs video from 2021. Kind of puts it into perspective of what you and your fellow civil affairs folks have done since. I didn't realize it goes back all the way to World War I, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, the ties of that. So, I thought it was more like the World War II type thing, but definitely you guys took your roots after World War I and really kind of been running with it the past 20 years, I'd say.
Absolutely.
So, well, welcome. We do not have you're not really an Ohio guy, which is surprising.
No.
So, yeah, he's actually Charles grew up in the D.C. area. Grew up in Monrovia, is that right?
Correct.
So where's that at?
So it's right out. It's near Frederick, Maryland. So I'm about 40 minutes from Baltimore, Maryland, and probably about 25, 30 minutes from Washington, D.C.
So parents in the military, or
no, not at all.
Nothing?
Oddly enough, I'm a preacher's kid. My dad was a minister, just retired. My mom was a teacher. There's nobody. My sister's a teacher. My brother owns a business, and my sister works kind of in the space industry.
So nobody else in your family, uncles, grandfathers, no one?
No. Well, both of my uncles were in the Navy, and then I had a great uncle that was a pilot in the Army Air Force back in the day. So not usual. I mean, we've seen with a lot of guests that have come on, there's usually some pretty strong ties to the military. And like you didn't start off right away going to the military like some people, right? You graduated in 1995. I graduated high school in 95, graduated college in 99, and then I worked for about a year and a half, and then I went in the military.
So year and a half, he likes to blow through his civilian time. So we'll go into that year and a half. We got to get him going. He was actually a police officer at Atlanta Police Department, right?
I was, but that was after I was active duty. I left active duty, and then I was involuntarily recalled.
Oh, that's right. You were juvenile probation. That's right.
Yep,
he was doing juvenile probation. That's right. And selling cell phones.
Right? And then I sell telephones.
What telephones were you selling?
Like Cisco, Exponents back in the day, Lucent Technologies, if you remember that company. And I'd sell phone systems to various businesses throughout D.C., Northern Virginia.
You were loving that. That's why you decided to.
It wasn't a bad job. I just don't think it was for me. I was just looking to do something a little bit bigger, and what I felt like more for the community, something bigger than myself. And there's nothing wrong with sales. I was dating somebody that does sales right now. I think it's great.
Yeah, I'm in sales now, so chill.
Yeah, there you are. I only said that for you, but no. So and then I, and I wanted to do police work, and then I looked into that, and it was going to take over a year, and then I joined the military. It actually was going to be a Marine, and I was all set to go to the Marines, and I called them up and I asked them a question, and they said, "Well, if you have questions for us, maybe you shouldn't be a Marine." I said, "Okay, maybe I don't want to be a Marine." So I called the Army, and the Army signed me up literally that day. And then the next day, the Marines came back to my house and said, hey, we're sorry about that. We had the wrong person. We got you mixed up. And I was like, I already signed a contract.
Yeah, there's
with the
some
Army.
asshole we really didn't want to talk to, but
that was kind of funny. The Marines were at my house like 3 deep, and I was like, "Hey, sorry, I signed this contract." And they're like, "Yeah, well, all right, sorry." And they all left.
They're like, "Yeah, you can't answer no questions now." They were, it's interesting. The Marine, when you hear the stories, we heard a couple people,
Sure.
especially on the enlisted side, that something happens with one recruiter and they just decide to change it up. And knowing the military and then recruiting, that has to drive those guys and gals completely crazy. That they go home and they're probably like, "God damn it, Charles, we had you on the ropes." But
it's kind of interesting. So when I call it enlisted, when I came in, I signed a contract for what we call Officer Candidate School. So it was like 09 Sierra, and what that meant was I was going to go through basic training, and then I went right into, I think I had like a little bit of a gap, maybe a month or two, and then went right into Officer Candidate School at Fort Benning, Georgia. And if you passed Officer Candidate School, you became a second lieutenant. If you do not pass Officers Candidate School, you became needs of the Army E4, and they could put you in any military occupational specialty. So there was a pretty motivation for me to get through that course. Whereas like the Marines, I was just going to go through their, I think it was OTS, Officer Training School. And if you pass it, you're a second lieutenant. If you don't pass it, you just go back to being a civilian.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that was different.
Yeah, there is a little bit of a difference in that.
But obviously you passed that class, right?
3 times.
I mean, OCS, you pass it, so third time's a charm. No,
third time.
But go back. He's blowing through. He's going too fast. I did have a question back to college. So
sure.
Messiah College.
So I went to Messiah College, a private Christian school near Harrisburg.
And you played lacrosse.
I did.
Which you didn't play lacrosse in high school, though. You got to explain.
No, so I played baseball, and then I tried out for baseball in college, and I played fall baseball. It wasn't that good, and the coach was like, "You probably got more at bats than you're going to get in the springtime." And I think I had like 4 at bats, and I was like, "This probably isn't going to work out." So then a couple of my roommates were playing lacrosse, and I literally had no idea about lacrosse, and I was a little bit bigger than I was now. And so I tried out my sophomore year, and I practiced after my freshman year. I'd play with these guys, and I literally had no idea about lacrosse in any way, shape, or form. So I just went out there, and the guy said, "Just go out and hit everybody. Just hit everybody. Hit them in the front, the side, the back." And so I went out to practice, and I just started hitting everybody. I didn't care if they had the ball. And in lacrosse, you can throw the ball on the ground if you're within 5 or 6 feet of them, you can knock the person as long as on the front or the side. But I was just so aggressive. I was cross-checking everybody. I was getting in fights in practice, and I had 0 talent to play the game. But the coach liked me because he's like, "You're about as aggressive I've ever seen somebody." And I made the team, which was shocking. And then I got my skills a little bit better. And by the time I was my senior year, I ended up being the captain of our lacrosse team, which was kind of neat, kind of a turnaround. So one of the few people that didn't play in high school and played in college. But it's just a little bit of grit and determination. My skills, I probably just made up in heart, to be honest.
It sounds like the water boy of lacrosse, though. You know what I mean? That's what.
Yeah, I didn't have the screams.
It might be a movie that
they might have one, but I didn't have the screams that Adam Sandler had. But I certainly gave it my best shot.
Well, I've heard from people playing like hockey and then going into lacrosse. Kind of picking up because kind of similar to the game and the thing, but that was interesting. You try to blow by that. That was a good, the water boy. We should be calling it water boy now of lacrosse. This is like we gotta look into this. But so, like I said, you graduated, then you did some civilian stuff for a little bit. You go to OCS. You initially get commissioned as an infantry officer, right?
I did. So I went through basic and then Officer Candidate School. Went into OCS, after OCS, went into infantry officer basic course. And at the time when I commissioned, they didn't have Bullock. That's a basic officer leader course. I I think they were just starting it, so I didn't even do that. And then oddly enough, I went to a basic training unit to work at for about 6 months. And it was probably one of the best jobs I've ever had as a second lieutenant. And I ended up being in the...
Which just surprised me before you go there, because you became an executive officer for AIT, right?
Mm-hmm. So,
which normally for people that, like, there's some people, the reason I'm just reiterate here, Charles, like most of the time an executive officer, you've already had your platoon leader time. So I noticed that when you came up, and you can explain that, but normally the XO time is after you had some time with the troops and did that. So I'm excited to hear the different, if you look at it, as we go along, you haven't had a conventional career, I would say.
Absolutely not.
So you're AIT XO.
So yeah, so it was actually basic training, not even AIT.
Okay,
well, it's basic training and AIT for infantry. So I went in there and worked there. I was about 6 months into it, and then things were starting to heat up overseas. And my boss came to me, and he said, "Hey, have you ever?" He already knew the answer. "You ever deployed?" And I was like, "No, I've never even been anywhere." So he's like, "Hey, I'm going to send you over to 3rd Infantry Division." And I was like, "Okay, sir. When are we doing that?" He's like, "In 5 days." And I said, "Okay." So I went over there in 5 days, and then I was on a plane, and I was in Kuwait and met with my unit. Ended up being, being a platoon leader. But if you backtrack towards that basic training, the reason why I say it was one of the best jobs I've ever had was, one, I really didn't have much experience. And next thing you know, I was, kind of forced into a position where I'm doing logistics, getting food, fuel for all the soldiers. And then, oddly enough, I don't know, whatever, the company commander that I had was relieved. And so the battalion commander brought me in. He's like, "Hey, I'm going to put you in charge of the company as a second lieutenant." So I had some growing pains, and it was really a great experience for me. And I remember one situation where, and it shaped me the rest of my career, because my boss would bring me in, and every single day he would ask me questions and quiz me. He'd like, "What's paragraph 3B in the op order?" Or "What is MDMP?" And I'd be like, "Oh my gosh," I would hate it, and I'd have to study. Or he'd be like, "I want you to read this book and write a report, and it's due next week." And I'd be like, "Are you seriously kidding me?" So I literally would write.
It sounds like when I was a platoon. This is like normal. This was very normal. I mean, this
guy, he was great. I remember Bradley K. Nelson, awesome guy, and his battalion commander was Lloyd Austin, who is now the Secretary of Defense. And I actually met him one time, and he came down to visit his former company commander, is now battalion commander. And I shook his hand, and he was like the biggest guy I've ever met. His hand engulfed my whole thing. And I remember that was a learning lesson, because I didn't realize you weren't supposed to shake people's hands with gloves on, but I couldn't get it off enough. So I got but literally probably was challenged by Colonel Nelson more than anybody else. And then I was put in charge of the company. But right before that was the Tillman brothers, Kevin and Pat Tillman, came through that basic training company. And I got to know those guys, actually fairly decent, just great. You want to talk about great patriots. One guy gave up an NFL career, and the other one was a minor league baseball player, Kevin. And they both came through and really worked their butts off. And we stacked the deck with that crew. We brought in all the drill sergeants, were just phenomenally fit, and just smoked the dog crap out of them when they first got in there.
Right. I would hope people know who they are. Like, you'd think. I thought about that today after we talked last night.
Yeah.
Like, do you bring up Pat Tillman, and do people know who Pat Tillman was? And I would think that most people do. I would hope they do. If they don't, then you definitely need to Google Pat Tillman and his brother, and really like take notes on what, like you said before, what it means to be a patriot, what it means for someone that, has a successful life and is compelled to serve others. And ultimately, if you don't know, Pat Tillman went on to serve in the 2nd Ranger Battalion and lost his life in Afghanistan a few years later. So, and there's some controversy behind that, but no, sorry to interrupt there. I've learned that we have a lot of people that aren't military oriented in the group. So I'm trying to, I feel like I'm like a historian too. Like, I'm old enough to be an historian to tell people all that, but I've always wondered, because we were, I was in active duty. I was, I think, what year was that he came through again?
So he came through 2002, I believe. Yeah. 2002.
Yeah. Because, and if you were in the Army then, like, at that time I was a captain in the 82nd, like, you're wondering if these guys are getting like taking, if they're getting passed through because they're celebrities, but it's good to hear you say that it wasn't the case. But I've heard that before, but I feel bad. Everybody was at the time, you got to back to what we're talking about. You see a person walk away from an NFL career, like, and you think, oh gosh, this guy's going to be, there's no way this guy can fail, right?
Well, I'll tell you, he came through and he was humble. There was a couple incidents that it was kind of funny. He was a great guy, and so one of the things that we used to get phone calls every single day, nonstop, 10 phone calls a day about news media wanting to interview him, and he didn't want to do any interviews. And that was, we talked about it a little bit before, during, and after. Wanted no media fanfare, and the graduation was pretty low key. I think the local newspapers were out there. We didn't tell them when they were going. We had zero issues with the drill sergeants treating them any kind of differently. The only issue we had, which is kind of funny, we went to, excuse me, the 29th, I think it's like Infantry Brigade Combat Team. They run the ranges there. And there was a range, and somebody brought out a football and tried to get him to sign it. And I saw it as a second lieutenant. So I grabbed it and I punted it right out in the middle of the range. And so they couldn't get it until afterwards, which is kind of funny.
But you wonder how many autographs he did sign in the,
Not while he was at basic training, I can tell you that.
In the middle of the night, guys are like, hey, Pat,
no, not at all.
can you sign my shirt?
No.
No,
oddly enough. And he didn't have any issues going through. I mean, a couple things here and there, but he didn't have any issues. But I do remember a couple things.
Because he was also the guidon bearer, right, for like his graduation?
Yeah, he was. You probably saw the Columbus Ledger.
It's like a famous picture of him. And like I said, if you know who Pat Tillman is, you need to get out underneath the rock that you're living in, and really take a look at it like a person that. I mean, still to think about what he gave up, it's humbling.
And the other thing too is what's not talked about is his brother was an outstanding individual, Kevin. He had a not as lucrative or successful in those terms of making it to the major leagues, but he was in the minor league baseball system, and they both joined together, and it was impressive. I mean, they were just impressed. But a lot of people are impressive that join the military. You just don't have to have NFL. There's a lot of people with advanced degrees. There's other people that come out of high school. But, the common theme for the most part is that everybody's a patriot, wants to serve and be a part of something bigger than themselves. And that's not always the case.
Well, no, that's true. But I think for our generation, he's one of the yeah, you're right. We've all met, guys and gals that, like you said, are, doctorates or all this kind of stuff. And they decide to join. But, I think for him, for our, for my generation, at least, he was kind of a rallying call to kind of justify, what all of us had already felt before, what I mean? And there was, what's funny, if you go back then, there was a lot of people still were thinking that too. It was like a publicity stunt for him too, I mean, to go out and do that. But his brother and his wife are running a pretty awesome charity right now. Charity right now. They've kept Pat Tillman's name alive, and as it should be. To the end of time, in my opinion. But it is good to hear. I remember the time, like, because if you're in a line, you're the time where you're thinking that there's a part of you that thinks that. I mean, you're like, we've done this, we're all doing this, and all of a sudden, why is this guy walking away? I mean. And I remember having conversations about the Army couldn't let the guy fail. And it kind of ended up, being a pretty controversial thing with his death, which we won't talk about in detail about the controversy, but it is kind of weird. But that's a pretty cool, experience to have as an XO, Pat Tillman. You didn't bring the football later and be like, Pat, can you sign this for me?
That's hilarious. No, I didn't. But I did end up having lunch with him and his brother after they graduated. Randomly, we were at like Atlanta Bread Company right there in Columbus, Georgia, and we sat down and talked for a while. And I think his dad was like a lawyer because I thought about going to law school. But just great. I mean, honestly, I just can't say enough good things about them. But it's interesting, before we kind of move on from the basic training, is that I was pretty upset that I was going to a basic training unit as my first assignment. And I think because I had good mentorship and leadership, where every week we would do these leader professional development series, it would be like we would learn something about the trade craft and somebody would have to present and brief. And then it was at least once a week I was given a due out or assignment and a quiz, and literally there would be a quiz. And if you didn't pass the quiz, like you're doing push-ups, sit-ups, or we'd have remedial training with the battalion commander. And it was good because at the time I was incredibly upset with it. I'd be like, why am I writing papers on my weekends about, relativism, constructivism, liberalism? And I'm like, well, now I kind of know because I'm in the war college. I'm like, wow, some of this stuff's popping back up. Or why am I learning about MDMP? I didn't even know how to spell it at the time. But it really helped me out later on in my career. But probably the most beneficial thing I learned, as a second lieutenant, when you come in, you're in charge, but you really don't have any knowledge or you don't have any skill set. But you can never forget that ultimately you're responsible, especially as an officer. What delineates our military, in my opinion, is the non-commissioned officer corps. Is probably the most educated in the world.
Don't tell Jason. Jason's
Jason
was not paying attention until that happened, and him and my dad are over there like hugging each other, like fist pumping. It's like,
well, I'm about to break it down. I'm about to crush his dreams in a second.
Oh yeah, here we go. There we go.
I'll tell you, Jason. One of the things I learned about being a leader and being in charge is when in charge, you have to take charge. You have to make decisions. And we went to a range, and I remember early on, it was probably like 2-3 months in the job. You have a pretty strong-willed first sergeant. You go to a range, and it's 29th. What I was saying, it was working that range, and it was basically I show up with the range book and have all this stuff, and they're like, "Hey, Lieutenant, go sit over there in the corner. Don't say anything. I don't need. We'll run this whole thing." I was like, well, okay, I'm getting yelled at, and you don't know any difference because you'd only been in the Army for a little while, even though I went through OCS. I mean, probably 7-8 months, been in the job too. So I did, and then we're on the range. It was a machine gun range, 7.62, 308 rounds for the hunters. It's a 240, what we call a 240 Bravo. So it's a machine gun that shoots 7.62. And a soldier had opened the feed tray, and the feed tray, the round exploded and hit his throat right here, and blood was coming out. And one of the drill sergeants clamped down on it. And I remember we ended up doing a 9-line medevac. Bird came in actually and brought him to Martin Army Hospital. And the drill sergeant ended up saving his life. It was amazing, unbelievable, just how quickly they reacted. Incredibly impressive. But the learning lesson for me was the post commander comes down, the brigade commander comes down, battalion commander comes down, company commander comes down, of course. And everybody looks around and they're saying, well, who's in charge? And so the one master sergeant,
that lieutenant
right there, the one master sergeant, I'm thinking they're all going to say him. They're like, he's in charge. And they're looking at me and I'm like, oh my gosh. So they're like, well, let me see your book. They go through the inspection process, which had nothing to do with, the incident. And we had all of our ducks in a row. And then from that moment forward, that was probably the best learning lesson. I was like, when in charge, be in charge. So I tell that to my young officers that work for me, or even young NCOs, is that if you're in charge of it, be in charge and take charge. And rank doesn't always equal knowledge and experience. Believe me, if you're a second lieutenant, unless you had prior service, you don't have that experience. But if you're in charge, make sure you run it.
Yeah, but that was always the thing as an officer too. Even not in an AIT or basic training unit, like you are responsible. That's what a lot of people like. Don't worry. Those are the same things. If you would have went to 4ID or second armed division, 82nd, that's the same way they were going to treat you. Beginning is kind of like, and I thought in the beginning, sometimes it is for you to watch and learn. Mm-hmm. And I also thought it too, sometimes it was a challenge to see whether, when you were going to finally say, hey, listen, that's not my job to sit here and just sit on the sidelines. I am ultimately in charge of this. And sometimes it does take tragedy and things like that. I remember range where I was a brand new second lieutenant, and another one of my fellow platoon leaders was running the range. And I drive out there with our company commander and first sergeant and my platoon sergeant, and we go out there. And when we get there, it is literally like the biggest shit show I've ever seen. It's getting dark. There's no organization. People are running around. It was an M16 range, and my company commander is just starting to flip out. You could just see him like, oh my God, like Captain Russell, who ended up becoming, I think he became a general. I'm pretty sure he did. But just watching him go from like this calm, cool guy to complete, I'm going to kill somebody mode. And it got dark. We had no idea where anybody was. He brought the whole, it was one of my, I think the first time I've ever seen this happen. I brought the whole entire company together, and was like, hey, I'm going to apologize on behalf of my officers. Like, my officers have let you down. I've let you down. And it was like, it was crazy to, I wasn't even in charge. I was just going out there to check on my soldiers. But him saying that just made me feel like such a failure. It was unbelievable. Mm-hmm. And I'll never forget, like, he's middle of this, and like, we're like, oh my gosh. And like, round the troops, and like right in mid breath, he goes, Roderick, you're lucky I can't find you or see you right now. Who was the other, and he goes, you better hope I don't find you for the whole night. So like, I remember like, the company goes back to, platoon sergeants are trying to get in charge. And all of a sudden he looks at me and my platoon sergeant's like, you guys are in charge now. And it was like, I never even ran a range. It was like you before, like I didn't night range, night fire. I didn't know what was going on, but it was one of those things. Like, I think as officers, I learned really quickly. Like at first it was like, this wasn't my fault. However, I'm in the chain of command. I'm an officer, and we did fail them. I mean, luckily nothing happened where a soldier was hurt like that, but it could have been bad. But I think we all start either good leaders on the officer side or good NCOs.
Correct.
To make us successful. And I think they're over there fist bumping again over there. Jeez, it's like they love hearing that. Jason loves hearing about how great NCOs are. First sergeants are the best. They're great. But but no. So you finally you get your wish, right? You're not an AIT basic training unit. You get sent to 3ID.
I go to third.
Perfect time, right?
Perfect timing. I literally I showed up at the end of December, and I think it was January. I think 29th or something of December. And I went over there, and it literally, I think it was like January 6th or 3rd. I was in Kuwait, and it's kind of surreal experience because you go through what we call a central issue facility, and they're like, "Where are you going?" And you're like, "I'm going to the 3rd Infantry Division." They're like, "Oh," and they're like, "So you're going overseas?" And I remember this at Fort Benning. I didn't know anybody in the unit. I'm going to a mechanized infantry unit, which means it's a Bradley. It's similar to a tank, except for it has a troop door in the back, and it carries soldiers in the back, and has a gunner and what we call like a truck commander or the TC, and then a driver. And I went over to the 3rd Infantry Division, and I remember like the first thing when I got there, like my uniforms, I don't have any patches on there, so I got to go get patches. And I can still remember this today. I was so nervous that I literally locked my cars and my keys twice with it running in Fort Benning. And the same guy, I think USA Insurance, the same guy opened the door. And he opened it one time. And it was like 2 days or 3 days later, like right before I left. And I was like, I locked my cars in USA, and the same guy comes out. He's like, "You again?" I was like, "Yeah, me again." And he's like, "You might just want to leave your car unlocked from here on out."
You might want to give your keys to someone else.
But it was interesting. So I remember, and you talk about like good people and just things being surreal. And I went in there, and I'm like, I got to get a will. And they're like, go get a will. So I go into like the legal office, and I said, I need to get a will because I'm going overseas. And they're like, who do you want to give your stuff to? I'm like, I don't know. And so they're like, well, we don't have any time for you. You have to come back next week. And I'm like, well, I'm flying out in 36 hours or 24 hours, whatever it was. And they're like, yeah, well, you can call a civilian lawyer. And I was like, okay, I'll call a civilian lawyer. I was like, do you have any recommendations? And the guy's like, well, there's a phone book. And I'm literally in the law office. And I'm like, okay. I think I do remember it was a Friday because we were leaving Monday. That's what it was. And next thing you know, like there was an IG that he goes, hey, I've been listening to this whole conversation with some colonel. And I never talked to colonels. He's like, how about you get your boss and have her call me or whatever. He's like, I'm the IG for Fort Benning. And he's like, I've been listening to this. And he's like, give me your phone number. He's like, Lieutenant, he's like, you'll be back tomorrow and you'll have a will. And I remember I was like, what, surreal. And so then literally the next day there was a lieutenant colonel doing my will. And then, we got that, and I got sew-on stuff. I think it was all messed up. I sewed on some other stuff. I got shots. I think I got so many shots I passed out or something. And then next you know, it's Monday. I'm flying to Kuwait. And then I joined my unit, been there for like a couple of days, and met the battalion commander. And he's like, what do you know?
Super excited to see you.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. And
where the hell did you come from?
They're like, who is this guy? And they're like, well, that's good. Go over to, this company. And that's all she wrote. So then we trained from January all the way up till March 19th. And it was pretty surreal because you don't really think you're going to go. You're kind of back in that time, nobody had cell phones. So I didn't have a cell phone. Right. There was, I think they called satellite phones back in the day, sat phones, we called them. There was like one for battalion. And then we kept getting stuff about we're going to get chem attack. There was going to be nuclear, biological, chemical weapons. And so it was interesting. We kept getting closer and closer to the border. And then next thing you know, the battalion commander brings in all the officers and senior NCOs. He's like, hey, we're crossing the border tomorrow or in 48 hours, and we're going to line up. So we lined up all of our vehicles. And then we've been eating MREs and what they call T rations, which is just like, I don't know, food in a big tray that's horrible, preservatives. It's probably been there since this was 2003. It's probably been there since like 1983.
Chili, probably.
Yeah, it was better
than that pulled pork.
Yeah, it was better than that wasn't better than the pulled pork. That was good. So next thing you know, we've been eating all this stuff, and then like Outback Steakhouse comes out, lobster tail, steak, near beer, soda, ice, and I was like, ice, this is awesome. We get ammo, And then
you know it's for real.
Yeah, you know it's
we're
for real.
really going somewhere. Yeah.
And then we're lining up. We get the brief, and it's like, okay, we're going to invade. Once we bust through the berm, you know, if your vehicle breaks down in Kuwait, you're going to stay in Kuwait. If you go through Iraq, into Iraq, you're just going to get towed. And I'm like, well, it's about to get real here.
Yeah, yeah.
And then all of a sudden they're like, hey, stop. We got to give up the ammo. We're turning the ammo again. And I'm like, what are you talking about? We're going into Iraq without ammo. And so they're like, no, we're not going to invade now. And I think that was like the 16th. And then I remember distinctly, there was I think it was a private first class. He said he was a conscientious objector, didn't want to fight, didn't want to go. And he's like, you know, it was like, we knew we were all going in. We knew we were going to invade Iraq. And so the sergeant major said, okay, no problem. And I still remember this. He was in my platoon. He said, okay. He said, I'm going to take your weapon. He's like, oh, thanks. I appreciate that. He's like, I'm going to take your weapon. He's like, that's good. He's like, I'm going to take everything you got. He's like, okay. He's like, see you later. He's like, so that means I'm going to go? He's like, oh, no, you're going. He's like, you're just going to go without a weapon. And so then he comes back like an hour later. He's like, I think I'm going to take my weapon.
I think I want to.
So he gives it back. And then, of course, we had another meal. I think it was like on the 18th. And the battalion commander said, yeah, we're going in. He's like, we're busting through at like 3 a.m. So,
yeah, because it was interesting. You were there. You were at the build. I was in Iraq. I was in Afghanistan at the same time. So it was also funny. We knew you guys were.
Yeah,
we were hearing rumors that the same way, like this was going to happen, like it was going to happen, like it wasn't going to happen, and it was, you know, always whenever I hear this story, like or watch movies, like you know when it happened, or hear like documentaries. At the same time, I really found out. I found out from like an Afghani guy who was like, we're outside of Afghanistan. It's like, you guys, you know, we give them this big spiel, and it kind of ties into what you go. We go out these team village with the civil affairs team, a PSYOPs team, and go out there and this village elder's like, you know, we're giving the spiel about how we're not here to fight against you know Muslims. We're here for Osama bin Laden and blah, blah, blah. And he's like, you guys know you invaded Iraq this morning. We're like, what? You know, and we knew it was coming, but it was so funny. We actually got he had a radio, and we listened to the BBC. Which was which was so crazy. I mean, so at the time, I mean, I remember sitting there like having like tea with this, like in the middle of Afghanistan, like listening to the BBC and talk about the invasion, and then to hear all the stories about you guys there, like if you've never heard that, I'm giving you ammo, you're going, no, you're not going. We at least knew we were going, like I mean, it wasn't like we knew we were heading there. We were getting on planes, unless they took us to a different country. We knew where we were going, so I couldn't imagine what that feeling was like. For you, and then also if you go back to like the Desert Storm guys and gals who dealt with that same thing, it's crazy.
So my platoon sergeant was a Desert Storm veteran, and it was really interesting. I worked with people that were Vietnam veterans, right? So that's pretty wild, that generational gap. But I'll tell you, it's kind of funny. So they're doing that initial invasion. Now, you're worried about a couple things. One, it was like Scud missiles, chemicals, and we were in what we call a J-list, which is a chemical suit. In the event, it's like a charcoal suit. But it's so hot in Iraq, and you're sweating through it. You're not wearing anything underneath, just a T-shirt. And I wore it for like 60, 70 days. And I think it's good for 72 hours or so. So I literally wore the same pair of pants, the same shirt for like 70 days and carried around a gas mask. And we had practice and practice and practice. And finally, like when we could take it off after, I think it was like 60 days into like, they're like, you can take it off. So you'll see people in like mismatched uniforms because they're what we call the J-list, the chemical suits. And then I don't even know, we left them. We just burned them basically. They were the most disgusting things I've ever seen. But so I was worried about that, which is kind of interesting. People forget about WMD and chemical weapons and anthrax. And that was my concern. And my number 2 concern the entire time, and it's kind of comical saying it now, was we had gotten our rules of engagement, and it was like, do not shoot the camels. So the entire time I'm briefing, don't shoot camels. Don't shoot a camel. I'm telling my guys, don't fire at a camel. We're going to go to jail if we shoot a camel. And then in the meantime, as you know, the 3rd Infantry Division pretty much annihilated everything in its path.
Yeah, including camels, I think.
Well, no, I think they were safe.
No, the only thing that survived were camels, I think. Yeah, 3rd ID did fuck some shit up. He's being very political about it, but they did go in and fuck up a lot of stuff.
Some will say that the counterinsurgency, better known as COIN, was invented because of the 3rd ID. But to be fair, we're invading a country, and we covered more ground. In 21 days to Baghdad is pretty remarkable, and we covered more ground than anybody else in history of modern warfare, actually in the history of warfare, which is quite remarkable. And, some of it was a lack of resistance, but some of it was just the sheer I don't know, tenacity or whatever you say it. It just, I mean, the third ID was like, here, we're as big as we got, and we're coming right at you, and we're going to punch you in the mouth and give us your best shot.
I also think, I mean, to back to what you're talking about, I think one of the things that whenever you talk about this, or I talk about, I hear about the invasion, I wasn't part of that, but Generation Kill, it's the Marines, but I think that is a movie or a series that you have to watch, what Charles is talking about, and it's going to put into a lot of perspective of, the Marines there were some Marines involved in that whole initial invasion and that's kind of thing. But back to you were saying about going and being tenacious. I feel like everybody was still pissed off about 9/11, and I think a lot of that had to do with it too. Is this was a chance to finally go honestly and really like win it. You know what I mean? And really make a lot of people pay for what happened and say what you want or whatever happened. But yeah, the third ID and a lot of other units really it was pretty impressive to. Yeah. Because you had a different mission than we did. We were doing a total different.
Correct.
We were doing more of kind of like what you're doing now is what we were doing over there in Afghanistan. It wasn't, let's just go out and start, swacking people or whatever. It was more, very, very, centered on, winning over the population. Trying to find Osama bin Laden. It was kind of different. So I can't lie. There was part of us, in the military at the time, we're super envious that you guys were going out and just fucking shit up while we were sitting in there like.
Well, I will tell you, it was very surreal, and it's you can't put into context what it is, and when you're on the tip of the spear, it's pretty awesome the power of the United States. There's a thing called an MLRS, and I didn't know what it was. It's called a multi-launching rocket system, and it looked like fireworks. There were so many. So when the invasion took off, the planes went into Baghdad, took out all the radar sites, and then next thing you know, you saw these multi-launching rocket systems taking off, and it felt like there was 1,000 of them just flying past. And then we bust through the berm, and we have Apache attack helicopters. We have the full backing of everything. Every single asset dedicated in the DoD was with us. F-16s, everything that
everything that you didn't believe existed.
Yeah, everything you didn't believe it existed. Anything we needed. A-10 Warthogs. You ran out of ammo, you got ammo immediately. Yeah. I think we had a couple busted Bradley parts and how they made it from South Carolina into, Baghdad or close there, even when we were in, Asamoah or Nazareth within 24 hours is remarkable.
Yeah.
It truly is. And the logistics, there's an old adage, right, that amateurs know tactics and professionals know logistics. To keep up with the pace of that is really a testament to the power of the United States. But it is amazing. So you go in there and not that you feel bad for anybody, but you almost feel bad because people just had no idea what was coming.
Yeah.
Especially when you see a task force and, made up of Bradleys and tanks. It was overwhelming firepower that there's nobody that could have matched that. And they didn't. And so, yeah. And then things went a little bit differently afterwards, but
they adjusted. I think that's one of the things. Yeah. I mean, I still firmly believe. I think everybody agrees. Like nobody could go toe to toe with the U.S. military. It's like, it's always funny. Even when you're in there, you don't even realize what you really have until it's time to use it. Like I remember the first time we ever saw CAS, and I was like, "This is fucking bullshit. There's no way these F-18 Hornets are even close to us from some aircraft carrier." And let me tell you what, they were there, and you're just like. And I just remember the first time that happened is I think we were so surprised. We're like school kids to look at each other like, holy shit, these were really they really are out there. You know what I mean? It was because at the time you've been there, I'm talking about, you're in the middle of nowhere. Like you think you're on your own, where the friendly forces are, but to call in something like that and actually see something like that, it still boggles my mind. I still remembering it so vividly looking at the FSO that called him in and was like, oh my God, I think he was just as surprised, like they're really there. I mean, and I think that's what's amazing about our military is what we can bring to bear.
Oh, it's unbelievable. And I'll tell you, one of the things that you talk about getting you chills or almost tearing you up to in a weird way is, I remember we crossed into the berm and the battalion commander said, and you never hear this, and you'll appreciate this as being in the Army. The battalion commander said, it was, gentlemen, welcome to Iraq, weapons free. There is nothing friendly to the north. Engage. And I literally it sends chills, except for freaking camels. And I'll tell you, but it gives you the chills because you're like, there's nothing friendly to the north. And it was, I'll never hear that again in the rest of my life. There's nothing friendly to the north. Engage. But then it was kind of funny because the first thing we did engage, Well, actually, there was two things. One, I don't know. We're busting through the berm, and all of a sudden you're boom, 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 and we're like, everybody's like, contact, 11 o'clock, and the guy's like, no, that's me. Sorry about that. And they're like, what's going on? And the guy lit off on a Mark 19, which is an automatic grenade launcher, and then we're like, oh, okay. But it got everybody's target factor, yeah. And so then the next morning, and we went in, 3 a.m. or whatever it was, and so daylight comes, and we're going probably 5-6 miles an hour. Let's be honest, maybe 10 at the max with that big of a thing. And we see this BMP, which is an Iraqi tank, and everybody sees it. And then just people start blasting it. And I think somebody even fired a tow missile, which is basically a missile that's wire guided. I don't even know what the thing costs. Probably 50,
well, I think, but you have to go back to the time. Like, I think, but you have to go back to the time.
But it was empty. That's the funny thing.
Everybody's ready to just fuck shit up, and it's like some lieutenant, like you remember it still.
Yeah,
The hair goes up on your neck, and some private is like, I finally get the fucking like shoot something, and you can't. I guess we laugh about this, and this is kind of talking about some really serious shit that I think. It happens to a lot of veterans as we're talking about this, people who aren't there, they kind of like, there's a part of them that like cringes a little bit. And they're maybe like, oh, I can't believe they're laughing about this. And I think that's one of the problems. What happens with veterans nowadays is we live that not all of us survived it, but it's hard to explain the mindset that you're in and how that makes you feel still today. And like, when you say that, you feel bad. Like, I can imagine my wife being like, oh, were you, I mean, what if it was this and that? And I think at the time you're just like, you don't care as long as it's not a camel, evidently. In the third incident. I've never heard that story before.
Hear about that tomorrow at work. But
yeah, they're
gonna be a camel.
I had to call my old boss, who was a brigade commander in 3ID. I'm like, damn, is that what the only rules of engagement?
Well, it's interesting.
Forget about civilians; they're fine. But don't, if they're like, take them out, leave the camels alone. I don't know what's going on about
we were loud about that too, because they're like, it was like Perkins. Alan was like the vice chief of staff. He was my brigade commander. And so I'm a lieutenant, and they're like, he ended up being a 4-star. And I'm like, what happened to me? I'm a lieutenant colonel. I was like, oh no, but they all did well. But you're right about that. It's really indescribable. And to the stress that it puts on the soldier, male, female, doesn't matter, anybody, officer enlisted, you can't. I mean, I was sharing a story the other day on how one time we thought we were surrounded, and they're like, hey, you're being encompassed by the enemy, and it was like goat herders or something like that. And you can kind of laugh about it now, but at the time, during that 4 or 5 minutes where you think, you're about ready to get attacked, even though, we had overwhelming firepower, you can't put in the words that type of stress. And so the stress, even from wearing our chemical suit, because we thought we were going to get chemical, and then you watch videos of what it does. And I just stopped watching it because I'm like, well, if it happens, all right. I mean, I guess that's
this thing I've had on for 3 weeks.
You remember, I don't know, we carried the entropy kits. We carried the needles, and that was in case your heart stopped or something like that. And you had, you're taking anthrax pills, and I think I got measles, mumps, or I got so many shots, I don't even know what I was getting. But that stress, you just can't. It's really hard to explain unless you kind of were a veteran. And not saying we're better or worse or anything else. It's just.
Well, I don't think it's better or worse. I think I'm glad you brought up. It is a stress. Like we were laughing about it, and I think if you went back, we're smiling about that. But at the time, if you're completely honest, all of us were scared.
Absolutely.
And that's the part is like, I think a lot of it is like nowadays we laugh about it because that's the easy way to have humor. But at the time, like, even though you want to do that, people, if you weren't scared, you're full of shit. I mean, it's just fine. Like, oh my God, what's going on? So I think that's a way for us, the humor that you see now in a lot of veterans, whether it's like when they're talking about it or in like memes or making jokes about it, it really hides the fear and utter, terror that we felt a lot of the times. You know what I mean? Like you said before, it doesn't matter. At some point you felt that way. You felt like today was your day. And it doesn't feel good. And it never leaves you, that feeling. I mean, it's like, I can remember all those moments probably better than the good moments of where I was really scared. And I thought this was like, holy shit, this is it. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't make you feel good. And, my way to do that is always humor, I guess, to get through it. But,
and I'll tell you, there's a camaraderie that you get in the military. It's fascinating. There's people that I deployed with in 2003 or went to OCS with or wherever that I still talk to today. And I can call them up, and I may not have talked to them in a year or something. Mm-hmm. And if I was like, hey, I need some help, they're going to come over and help me out. Or it's like we never left. And so that bonding there, especially if you've deployed with somebody
Right.
or even jumping out of airplanes or whatever the case may be, I mean, that's something.
You've jumped out of an airplane before?
You know what? Once or twice.
Not good. So we have to take a break here. We're moving along. I'm going to get in trouble from Jason, who's our whiskey guy, about how long it's taken me to do that. He likes me to do this a lot of the way. So we're going to talk about the first feature whiskey. Okay. Charles is not drinking. No, but he brought one of his favorites. We always ask the guests. So we have some other bottles up here, just of Elijah Craig. But
it's coffee, unfortunately.
Yeah, Charles brought. Yeah, it's just coffee. Don't worry about it. Decaffeinated coffee. But we've talked about Heaven Hill in the past. This is Elijah Craig Barrel Proof. He brought in for us today one of the little bit older batches from 21. So B21. Are you gonna have some with your coffee, or
I'll drink some after the show?
Yeah. You can wait till after.
And
it's good to be able to, you can't enjoy it. I feel like I'm torturing you. It's back,
I mean, you know what? It's called, I don't know, lawyers, right? I'm just kidding.
Yeah. I know you feel. We know how the lawyers are. They keep you out of trouble, though.
If you ask, I always joke around, and I have literally like 8 or 9 lawyers in the battalion, which is kind of oddly high. And I always joke with them and say, the great thing about you guys is I can ask the same question and I'll get 8 different answers.
Yeah, and just go.
But for this one, I got 8 of the same answers.
Wow, 8 for 8. That's unusual for lawyers to agree. But we're having Elijah Craig Barrel Proof, distilled at Heaven Hill, and we've talked about Heaven Hill in the past. It's a private American-owned family distillery that's been operating since 1935 in Bardstown, Kentucky. Like we said before, it's the 7th largest alcohol supplier in the U.S. and 2nd largest holder of any bourbon whiskey in the world. And they're still independently family owned by the Shapiras. If you've had Heaven Hill, a lot of people don't know you've had Heaven Hill. I think you brought a bottle, didn't you? Did you bring a bottle of Heaven Hill?
No. Oh yeah, I did bring Heaven Hill.
Yeah. But they have other brands: Elijah Craig, Old Fitzgerald, Larceny, Henry McKenna, a lot of other Evan Williams, a lot of other pretty well-known brands, but they come from Heaven Hill. The Elijah Craig Barrel Proof series started in 2013. In March. It's kind of taken a little bit of a change. The initial batches that came out in 2013, they didn't have a number system, but they've kind of perfected that. Each Elijah Craig batch comes out 3 times a year. Each batch is released it's in January, May, and then September of each year. And they have a letter and number that corresponds with the release. So like the one that happens in January is A1, the one in May is B5, and then the one in September is C9. So for like the one you brought here is B21, so that was released in May of 2021. All the releases, the proofs are different. This is one of the lower proofs, if I remember, for a while that they've done. I think it's like 118 or so. But although the proofs change, they're always 12 years old. The one you brought, like I said before, is it's age 12 years old, 118.2 proof, and it's their normal mash bill from Elijah Craig, which is 78% corn, 10% rye, and 12% malted barley. So, and you can't go wrong with any of the barrel proof. And as we talked before, they're now doing private barrels, which this is a perfect lead into. If you haven't already got into the randomizer, we're going Tuesday, Elijah Craig Barrel Proof. We've got 1 slot. You know how to donate. We'll talk about that later, but definitely a great experience, a great distillery. And thank you for bringing it. I brought, the ones we have here before we can enjoy once you get off camera. There's some a little bit older ones, but these are all 3 of the series from 2019. And Elijah Craig Barrel Proof got its big for the bourbon nerds. It got big with B517, which won Whiskey of the Year, and that's what kind of launched it through the atmosphere, I guess. And I think I might be able to dig one out. I think we have one. So have you had that one?
I have not. No.
Since you haven't drank it all the whole night, we'll let you have that before you leave. So, but that's our first whiskey break. So we're back to Iraq. Okay. You're knee deep in the shit. So you have an interesting career at that part. You deployed Iraq,
came back, right, and went to NTC, JRTC.
You went back to Benning, though, right?
I went back to Fort Benning, and then was a support platoon leader, which is probably the most difficult job I've ever had as a mechanized support platoon leader. Primarily because I think as a platoon leader, it was funny because I was at NTC and I was finishing up my platoon leader time and I was loving it. And the battalion commander came up to me and we had deployed together and he's like, Charles, or he goes, Chuck. That's what he says, Chuck. He goes, I'm going to switch you out. He's like, what would you like to do? Scouts, support platoon leader, mortar platoon leader. I was like, Scouts, sir. He goes, you'd be a great, he goes, you'd be a great support platoon leader in his fight. I was like, really, sir? He's like, yeah. He goes, you'll learn more than that job than any other job you'll have in the Army. Yeah. I said, okay, so I can do scouts? He's like, nope, go get your new platoon. I was like, when? He goes, right now. So I literally switched out an NTC, and I think I still remember this to this day. I had like 58, 60 people, and like 30 vehicles, fuelers, HEMTs, everything you could ever imagine. Ran the motor pool with the battalion maintenance officer, the cooks. Yeah. And so I'm responsible for food, fuel, and ammo for the battalion. And I tell you, it was probably one of the more stressful jobs, but I learned more about just wheeling and dealing and realizing like not everything operates in black and white. And sometimes you need stuff, you get to trade with other battalion. And I mean, I was wheeling and dealing C4 for you name it. I'd be like, oh, I've got 50 cal rounds. Can you give me some C4? This person needs it. And literally I'm going around just throughout the entire Fort Benning just doing that stuff. And it was always expected. And you get it done. But it was a great job. And yeah, I mean.
Yeah, the support platoon leader job is rough. I mean.
Oh, horrible. Yeah.
It's I remember when I was the BMO, the support platoon leader, I'd always be like, the only job would be worse, I think, I always thought my job was horrible. His was rough. You'd see him out on all these log packs and like everything. Like, I mean, and then people were getting fed and people were getting freaked out. And like, I mean, just like, I always felt bad for that job. That job is like, I mean, like reefers and all this kind of stuff. And it was just like, and it was funny. I became a HHCXO, and then like, it's, that you're in charge of all of them, you know what I mean? And it just makes it even worse because you're still getting your ass chewed about HHC, the support platoon stuff. That's what I remember getting my ass chewed the most about. Like, I remember one time we had a reefer at a gunnery, and the reefer went down. So they were serving steaks that night. So the battalion commander was freaking out about what's going to happen about, how are my guys going to have steaks before they qualify table 8 gunnery? And this thing breaks. So I have to go out there and, I don't know where my company commander was at the time, probably not answering his phone, but I go out there and this battalion commander is just chewing my ass. But when, because what we did, some NCO, the mess sergeant decides instead of the reefer, we'll pre-boil the steaks and then we'll grill them off. That way we don't lose all this stuff. Mm-hmm. And this battalion commander didn't want to hear it. He wanted to know where the hell this reefer was, which belongs to like probably Penske, your girlfriend, sorry about that broke down. We have no idea when it's coming. And I remember him just like chewing my ass and thinking, I'm a senior first lieutenant, and I'm like, what's worse can happen? And he was yelling at me, and he was about this table at gunnery and steaks. And I was like, sir, if grilled steaks is the reason your guys don't qualify table 8, you got bigger problems than that. And I remember him looking at me for like 20 seconds, and I was like, he's going to fucking punch me in the face. And he was like, you know what? Just get it fixed. And I was like, oh, thank God. I mean, but yeah, the support platoon leader job, if you've ever had that's a tough job. I mean, you're really in charge of it. I mean, other than the maintenance part of it, you're in charge.
You were, and then miraculously, everybody that got into trouble ended up making it to that platoon. So everybody that anybody,
I don't know. I feel like medics were the worst.
Medics, yeah, but anybody that was like that used drugs got caught. Next thing you know, they'd be on my books, and I'm like, what? And then so
yeah, they were an 11 Bravo. All of a sudden, they're 88 Mike. Like, was this guy in Bravo Company before? And
yeah,
not anymore. He's not. He's driving trucks, but yeah.
Yeah, so.
But that's a lot to learn. I mean, how much did your XO time at?
So that really that actually did help me out. So obviously being a rifle platoon leader or a mechanized rifle platoon leader in Iraq helped out. But really that foundation started with that first battalion commander taking me under the wing, even the XO challenging me, asking me questions, and then with a couple of the incidents happening at range, it really kind of shaped that. And then by the time I got to the support team leader, I was more of a senior first lieutenant. I think I was promotable for captain, and then that's when I got out. But yeah, I mean, I think that really helped shape. And by that time, I was already well known within the community. And it was kind of funny. So when I got back, I was a support platoon leader. Kind of a funny story. So we go down to the officers club. They had them back in the day. They had officers clubs, and it was the 3rd Infantry Division was getting recognized, and I think President Bush at the time had recognized them at Fort Stewart. 3rd ID was split between Fort Stewart and Fort Benning, kind of across the state, Savannah, and then Columbus, Georgia. And General Casey came down, and I'd met him in Iraq one time. So it's all these general officers, 4-star general there, and I think it was Webster was there too. And so we're just sitting there all there, and we're all in khakis or whatever. And so everybody's going up there they want to talk to the general. So I'm in the back doing my thing, and I'm like, nobody's having any beer. And I'm like, I'm gonna order a pitcher of beer. So my buddy's like, really? I was like, yeah, why not? He's like, I'll order a pitcher of beer too. So we both ordered pitchers of beer, and then Casey comes over, General Casey, and he's like, hey guys, what are you guys doing? And we're like, we're having some beer. Do you want some? He's like, sure, let's do it. And so he sits down and starts drinking beer with us. And obviously he knew we were lieutenants. And he's like, what do you do? I was like, support platoon leader. He's like, oh, you must be good. I was like, either that or I'm really bad and somebody's upset with me.
Yeah, but you knew the time that wasn't. Like my support leader, one of the is Doug Price. It's a shout out to him. He's not in the group, but I don't even know. Doug was a prior enlisted guy. And you ever see Falling Down with Michael Douglas?
Yeah, I've seen that.
He looked exactly like that. He had the glasses, and like literally the dude could stay up for
I felt
3
like
days
that.
at a time. I mean, he literally was rock solid. And I think people knew that. Like, you looked at him, he was crazy. Like, he literally was crazy. But and it's funny about him is, like, I knew he was crazy when his family lived up in Dallas, and we were stationed at Fort Hood. And he used to drive home every weekend to go home. But during the week, he would sleep in the back of his pickup truck in a sleeper. He'd built this, like, he's the original, like, I think everybody's doing that nowadays. So at the time, I am like, first lieutenant. My wife, my fiance hasn't moved down to Fort Hood yet. I'm like, Doug, like, why are you sleeping in the back of your truck? You should come stay at my place. Doug, biggest mistake I made in my life. I mean, it was but he comes in, takes over. He's sleeping on the futon, and it was hysterical because he was like, honestly, man, I don't have much money to give you. Because this guy's married, has 2 kids in Dallas.
Sure.
And so I was like, no, man, don't worry about it. I'm good. And just like, throw me whatever you can, whatever. So one day he's like, do you golf? And I'm like, no. He's like, well, how about I give you a set of these Titleist DCIs, golf clubs? I was like, he's like, these are really good clubs. I'm like, I don't know. And he's like, I'll give you lessons. So, for my rent, he was teaching me how to golf. He was actually a really good golfer. And, but the one thing I learned about him is he was like, as far as people go, that job, he really was, emotion never got in the way.
Right.
He was probably the most calm person that we knew, but there was an inner part of him that I was still scared of him that he was going to do a Michael Douglas, the thing. But I mean, it was great. I mean, that job is like, you laugh about it. I think your boss knew at the time that who took that job. Yeah. I don't know if the support platoon sucks. There's a lot of bad things.
Nothing's
going to happen. Like, it's going to be a fucking shit show.
You talk about learning from that job and being calm, cool. I think that's where I got my demeanor where I'm at now. I was probably a little bit of a hothead right in the beginning until Iraq, and I kind of chilled out a little bit. But coming back to that position, it just taught you, because there's a crisis every single day. Literally, there's a crisis every day. And a crisis could be as easy as, hey, the coffee's cold, the battalion commander is pissed, and you better get coffee, and then you got to go deal with the cooks. And they're like, well, the cafeteria shut down. Well, you better open it back up because the battalion commander is upset. And the brigade commander is going out there, and we're not going to have cold coffee. And so you have that. Then,
but it was a huge tragedy back then.
Listen, you didn't mess with, food, money, and chow. And I remember, like, if the food wasn't right, it was a problem. And then you'd always be missing ammunition. You're always missing it. It's a big deal to get your battalion commander to sign off or whatever. And I remember one time we had traded for, you're making so many deals. Like, I'd trade for C4, then I'd take that C4, trade for 50 cal. And I have so many different things. Well, it's all legal. I mean, we signed 2062.
Sign this,
Right. Yeah. It's not like we're taking it home or anything. I mean, we had like a little ammo supply point. So my soldiers were guarding it. So they never got breaks. We were never put on duty, but you're always checking on everybody because you're working every weekend. But you're always missing something, or somebody's missing something. And that could be some ammo or dunnage, or it could be anything, or fuel. We didn't have enough fuel. And you're always trying to figure out how to make it happen. And I think that's where, for me, it's like, don't sweat the small stuff, and everything's the small stuff. And that's where I kind of got that motto, if that makes sense.
I felt like my job for that was XO, though. The company XO is where you start to see the same thing. You're responsible. You're overseeing them. Like, all of a sudden you're, when the sport, when any of the platoon leaders aren't there, you become responsible. And that's what's funny about, that. And even the medics too. I used to laugh about medics. The medics used to drive me nuts because they seem to get in trouble all the time. But, when as things change in the world, you're like, wow, we really do need the medics. At the time, I was like, what the hell do these people do besides, get a sick call? They do.
You're deployed to your
no, it
best
changed
friend.
a lot. I mean,
Yeah,
I'm a
it
pretty,
did.
like, I came in '94. So at the time you were always doing that and like wondering, like, I would go to like the aid station and get an IV, and like these people would be struggling to give you an IV with middle day, and you think like, what the hell's going to happen when?
Yeah.
But that's that whole, the HHCs are often overlooked. Everybody wants to talk about the scout platoon. That's the cool one. But
Yeah.
I came across a lot of officers and successful officers that had that tough job as support platoon leader, medical platoon leader. Like there's all those hard jobs.
And I'll tell you, the what I grew a lot of respect for was what we call logistics, the personnel. So a lot of the log pack, or we would say the logistics are. When we came and invaded the country, most people aren't going to try to pick a fight with a mechanized infantry. It just doesn't work out well for anybody, for you, the enemy. But the logistics, the people that are bringing up the food and the fuel became soft targets. So our cooks in the 3rd Infantry Division all engaged in combat because, why wouldn't you let, an infantry unit who's looking for a fight, and then you have, the cooks that are just trying to cook people meals and get up there, and the fuels and the fuelers and HEMTs. So it's interesting. So they actually engaged a lot because a lot of people just let us bypass, and then they would take pot shots at those ones. So very interesting. And then sadly enough, that's where we saw the Jessica Lynch incidents like that, which we were there. I remember that specific situation.
But Shane, so you come back, you go to NTC, you do the dreaded NDC.
So I got
How many times you have been to NTC?
I've been there one time.
What about JRTC?
Twice. And you know what? I would rather go anywhere on earth other than JRTC.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. Like, I was going to wonder if you really were psycho if you said which was worse. So NTC.
NTC wasn't bad.
I did 5 rotations NTC.
I didn't mind
2 at JRTC.
So the national
JRTC sucks the worst.
So for those, I guess, your viewers that aren't in the military, the National Training Center is out in Fort Irwin, California.
In the middle of nowhere.
They got the Teaford Mountains. It's cold at night. It's hot in the day. The Joint Readiness Training Center is in Fort Polk, Louisiana, where the mosquitoes are like birds and everything bites, everything stings. It's hot, prickly heat. If you've never heard of that, you will if you go there. It's the most miserable place I've been on earth. And I've been to a lot of terrible places. I thought Qatar, Kuwait, Iraq. I mean, there's no place worse than Jerry. Yeah. I actually went back there last month to visit some of my soldiers that I think I had nightmares. And I probably should have checked myself for PTSD from JRTC.
I think you laughed at like 2 weeks ago. Somebody told me their son's stationed there, and I was like, oh, that place is a shithole. And they're like, oh, he likes it. And I'm like, the only people that I've ever known that like being stationed at Polk is if you're a hunter.
Yeah,
because I've heard there's good hunting, but I'm like, if he likes it there, your son is lying to you because it's a shithole. It's like the worst. I mean, there's nothing you can. NTC sucks though too. I mean,
it wasn't as bad as it wasn't. So for us, I'm in a mechanized vehicle. I wasn't light, so I was in I was in a Bradley. It was warm. And so it was cold. We just turned on the Bradleys. And
but NTC is I guess it got better because you got, if you ever deployed over to the real desert, you realize how bad you're like, this sucks. You're like, gosh, NTC wasn't that bad. But no, NTC was just like, I could imagine being stationed there. Like that was one of the things but those assignments, what are interesting about those assignments we're talking about is if you're stationed there as like the OPFOR who, when we're talking about rotations, usually the units go there and cycle through and they play, really, really high speed war games against OPFOR. Being OPFOR is like one of the, like you talk to a lot of people, it's a cool job. And like a lot of the people that do that OPFOR job at NTC or the JRTC, they're super successful, later on, because you're getting introduced to, a ton of tactics. I remember, we went to JRTC, my first rotation, and we thought we were going to, remember you talked about that speech about, you're going over there. We thought we were going to be the first unit from the 82nd to go to Afghanistan, and we're in JRTC, and General Vines is giving us the speech, and we're all excited. And then we get back and find out that we got bumped. And then the best news was we got to go 2 months later to the other battalion's JRTC rotation because they couldn't go. And it was so joyous to go. But what was crazy about that is I laugh about that, but in that short time of the first time we went to the second time, that's when JRTC changed their whole tactics of like what the war was going to be, which I thought was amazing. I mean, the OPFOR people, that's one of the jobs I thought I'd always want to do is go there. But like living in Fort Irwin or Fort Polk,
it's very important. I mean, all jokes aside, it's some of the best training I think units can get. And everybody jokes about it, nobody wants to go, but in reality, you can't replicate that unless you're in combat. No. And it has all the resources. You lose for the most part, which is by design. And I think that's the best thing for units, because sometimes we get in this mindset we always have to win.
Yeah.
And you can learn more in defeat. I think a lot of times. And
I think you lost all the time though in those.
That?
In those situations, you
nobody.
You always were losing. It was like you may win the you're going to win the battle, but you didn't win the war. It was always
but plus the fact I remember like one time I was so annoyed, like at NTC, it was like we had a whole battalion out there, and there's like, I don't know, a Humvee version, whatever it is over there. And then it was like one tank, and it took out our whole battalion. And because probably they have lasers on their things, and their lasers, I mean, they like, I know they're all cheating, right? And then their miles, they call it miles here, but their lasers were like,
it's high tech. Like for people to know, it's high tech laser tag.
High tech laser tag.
And these guys and gals all have everything like zeroed in and then like taped on. Like they give it to you like, 3 days before you go. Half the shit doesn't work, and you're right. Like I remember, it's the same thing. You always lose. Like you see some guy standing like sideways, just like taking out people, and you're like, we just shot him with a 50 cal, and it like his miles going to go off. He's fine. I'm like, this is not. But you are right. It does stress you. Like I don't think it was. To be honest with you, like those rotations are stressful. I mean,
they are.
If you like think about those times, there's some times that you were. You're getting the lack of sleep. You're getting realistic training, and I think the funny thing about it is with the invention of TikTok, right, which is new. I love when you'll see JRTC people like post pictures, like Mill Talk or whatever, and they'll have the JRTC uniforms on, because they have different patches, and all these people will jump on them about how they're fake valor and all this kind of stuff, and I'm like. You just don't know. Like, I mean, like these guys really do they do walk around where
they actually go to the PX, because I was there the other day and I really wanted to strangle one of them, but I was like, because it was like a flashback, and I was like, you guys cheat. You screwed me out of it.
But they're wearing
2004, you screwed me. We should have beaten you. As a matter of fact, it was an NTC. I was like, I took over the support platoon leader, and I remember like, we're doing pretty good. Like we're getting our logistics up there, and the boss is like, when are you going to get up here? I'm like, good. And next thing you know, like these planes come out of nowhere, like MiGs or whatever they're are, and then they're like, the guy's like, you're dead. And I'm like, what do you mean I'm dead? I didn't do anything. The guy's like, I just dropped a bomb on you. I was like, come on, what am I going to do with that cat? Close air support. I was like, okay, sure.
But but I'm with you. At least we agree. JRTC armpit.
Oh, it's the armpit it's the armpit of the world.
I thought that was New Jersey, but
that's the armpit of America. I don't consider JRTC part of the United States anymore. I mean, so it's literally Fort Polk is. God bless you if you live there.
We're sorry.
Yeah, there'll be like something on my desk tomorrow.
Yeah, you'll be
commander
like,
of Fort
they'll be
Polk
like, guess what? You're going to JRTC now.
Actually, I'm going to PCS this summer. They're like, the Army Futures Command is now. You're going to be at Fort Polk.
Your girlfriend's not enjoying what we just. JRTC is lovely.
It's great.
It's very close to. No, I'm kidding. New Orleans, is it close to New Orleans? I don't even know.
Like 3 hours, maybe. I don't know. Shreveport,
yeah. Great places. But so interesting, you come back all that, and like I guess we're you've had a long career and an interesting career, so you now go into the IRR, right?
So I left active duty, and I was promotable to captain, and because I went through OCS, I could get out of my contract, and I did. I always was stop loss. I think I missed it by a week, and so I left, and I wasn't sure what to do, so I got a job with the Atlanta Police Department. They hired me.
So what made you get out? You were doing the civilian thing. You said you were looking for a purpose.
I loved the Army. I really did. I liked it. But I wanted to be a police officer before I joined the military. And the real reason I didn't do it was because when I started looking at the police department, it was going to be over a year to get hired. So back in the early 2000s, late 90s, it was over a year and a half to get hired. And
now it takes about 9 days.
Yeah, now it's like 9 days now.
Nobody wants to be a cop.
And it was, so I literally got a job. So I called when I was getting out of the military, I literally got out of JRTC, and then I got out in like 9 days or 10 days. So I went to JRTC. It was one of those things where like, yeah, you're going. I'm like, well, I'm getting out of the Army. And they were trying to convince me to stay. And I ended up leaving. There was no hard feelings. And so I joined the Atlanta Police Department, and I worked there for a couple years. And then transferred back towards my home in Maryland, Montgomery County, Maryland, on the DC line, and worked there until I came back in the Army.
So now we're transitioning to the police.
So we're going back to the police department, and yeah, it was interesting because I had a little bit longer hair, and I always joke around. People are like, "What did you do?" And I was like, "I used to buy and sell drugs." And people are like, "What, really?" And they're like, "You? I can't believe that." I'm like, "Well, I was a police officer." And they're like, "Oh, okay." So I was doing like street crimes, minor stuff, and it was funny. I got a letter in the mail, and it was kind of funny. It was like, Lieutenant Scheck, you are now promoted to Captain Scheck. And I was like, oh, this is hilarious. I didn't know I was in the Army. I literally had no idea I was in the Army. And I got a letter in the mail saying I was promoted. And because my mom had said, she's like, you got something from the Army, and it says you're promoted to captain.
We'll go back before you do that.
Okay, sure.
We have to, like, I get a lot of criticism, but we have to tell. So he's in the IR, which we said that it's individual ready reserve.
Right.
So that's basically like you still owe some time, right?
I didn't do anything with the Army.
Yeah, you're like detached. Like you have a uniform.
I didn't even have a uniform. I had nothing.
You had something hidden away, right?
No, I mean I had like my I Love Me stuff.
Yeah. But yeah, you're just really like, I've got this minor reserve time I got to burn off, and you never really hear of anybody. You're like one of a handful of people I've ever known that got recalled.
So,
but yeah, you're just living your life. You're living your best life. You're like, hey, I'm fucking done with the military. I'm just doing that. So that's what the IRR means, an active ready reserve. Yeah, so, you just are basically going to write out 2 years or 3 years, and then you're done.
Well,
right?
It
depends on who you're.
We'll get into that one in a second. So, as an officer, it's a little bit different than enlisted. As an officer, unless you resign your commission, you're still officially in the military, which I didn't know. Clearly, I was a lieutenant.
I didn't look at the fine print on that.
I didn't read that fine print. And then you still have like IR time of up to like 8 years or whatever the case may be. So I'm literally, I transitioned up to Montgomery County Police. I was loving life. I was enjoying it. I really enjoyed being a police officer. A lot of fun. It was exciting. It was similar to the military. You have that camaraderie. Not as much, though, as in the military. It's not a knock on the police work. It's just different when you deploy. So I literally get a letter in the mail. My mom was like, I was like, go ahead and read it. She's like, oh, it says you're promoted to captain. I started laughing. And so it's like literally for a week, people in the police department, they're calling me, oh, Capitan, captain. And I was like, El Jefe, Capitan. And it was funny. And so then.
Was something in your brain, like something's not right? Like,
no, I just thought it was funny. I was like, this is weird. And literally I was the longest serving first lieutenant. So and I think that's why they promoted me, because for them to bring me back, I would have been kicked out because I didn't have no time, So I literally, I get a letter, and then I get that letter, and I'm like, it's not a big deal. So then I'm traveling. I don't even know where I was going. I was traveling somewhere, and my mom's like, hey, you got this big package in the mail, and everything's going back to her. And I was like, oh, okay. I was like, sure, Mom, go ahead and open it up. And then she's crying, and I'm like, what are you crying about? What's wrong? It says that you're ordered to go to Iraq. And I'm like, no. And she's like, no, it says that. I'm like, oh. And then I had a flash in my brain. I'm like, oh my gosh. Like, oh, Mom, I wanted to go back. And I'm like, all right, can you read it to me? It says, congratulations. Captain Scheck, you were ordered to Fort Benning, Georgia, with follow-on training at like Fort Hood, and then follow on to Iraq, not to exceed 400 days, minimum 365, not to exceed 400. I'm like, what in the what is this a joke? So I got back, and
great joke.
I read it, and I'm like, this big packet. It's like, you got to show up here. You got to do that. And I'm like, so I called them, and I'm like, hey, is this for real? And they're like, yes, it is, Captain Scheck. And I'm like, oh, all right. And I'm like, so what happens if I don't show up? They're like, well, we will charge you for desertion under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. I say, hey, I got it. I'm a cop. I'll be there. I said, I just want to know, is this mandatory?
Yeah, relax a little bit here. We're just not. Let me ask you a question, though. That's one of the questions that, I didn't write down a lot of. I don't write down a lot of questions, especially with yours. Is like as you go through, we talked a little bit, and
well, you're in the 82nd, getting crayons and stuff.
Yeah, right? Like big crayons, and it's getting. But that's why I got a bigger book. It's easy to write with crayons, sure. But
yeah.
So you're living your best life, right? You're enjoying yourself. You made a decision to get out.
Mm-hmm.
What all joking aside, we like to laugh about it. You're making jokes, but what went through your mind when that happened? Were you like, holy, how did this disrupt you personally?
Well, yeah,
obviously professionally, you got to walk in and say, hey, I'm leaving. But I mean, how did it affect you personally and emotionally?
So one is I didn't think it was real, and then two, I didn't think it was real until I made the phone call. And I love the military. I still did. I was a Patriot. I was in the police department. I didn't want to go back into the military. But when you got the orders, I was a little upset because I just got accepted at Johns Hopkins University for a master's program. And believe me, I'm not Johns Hopkins material. It's legacy. My dad went there. So Either that, it might have been a social experiment to see how well I did,
or how poorly you
or how poorly I did, and just out of mere curiosity to see what this guy could say.
So some professors like, we just lost out on
like,
our number one subject about what was going to happen here.
This guy had thank God he can pay his bills. But so I went down there, and I was a little upset, but I started calling everybody. I started calling buddies of mine who were in the military, and the guys like, and I remember calling my buddy we called him Old Man Mobley, right? I'd win him, he was older than me. Everybody's got names. So I call Eric, and I'm like, hey man, I was like, dude, I just got recalled in the Army. He's like, no way. And I was like, I guarantee you probably getting called back in. You were in the infantry just like me. He's like, I was like, I got a huge package in the mail. He's like, oh my gosh, man, I have a big package at the apartment. They told me I do. And I was like, dude, you're going to be in the Army. He's like, no, I don't want to be in the Army. I was like, you're in the Army. I'm making fun of him. And that's like your humor. Like, now you got me teared up. So you won. So I'm crying. I'm on the phone crying because it's hilarious. Like, I'm laughing. I'm like, oh, you're going with me. And so he opens it up, and he calls me like 2 days later. He's like, oh my gosh. He's like, I'm going in the blankety blank Army. This is BS. I called down there. And so I'm like, I'm dying laughing. I'm like, oh man, you're going. He's like, same report date, same unit. And so we go down we're like, well, let's just coordinate our flights. So we do. We go down there, and we show up to Fort Benning, Georgia. And it's like, I'm just like, ugh. Right? You know what I mean? I'm just like, what is going on? I have no uniform. And then, we try to get on post. She's like, where's your CAC? And I'm like, what?
My CAC is in my
I'm like, I said, and I'm like, I said, excuse me? And I was like, what are you talking about? She's like, your common access card. I was like, I don't know what you're talking about.
She's like, IR for fucking.
She's like, your ID card. I was like, don't let me in. I said, I've got these orders that say, but if you want to write in a piece of paper, I'm going to come here. She's like, oh.
You see this packet?
She's like, all right. She's like, you were supposed to take the bus. And I was like, okay, I didn't take the bus. And so we get there, we go to this thing, and it's just like typical, like, I'm like, it's like all of a sudden you're back in the Army after like 3 years and change. And so they're like, oh, I go in your barracks. So me and Old Man Mobley, we get one. And all the officers show up, and we're just like, oh gosh.
Was everybody in voluntary mode?
Everybody was in voluntary mode.
This is a happy group of people.
There's like 20 officers, and we're all captains. And it was like, and so they're like, all right, stay there. So then we don't know what to do. So what do dumb privates do, right? Dumb captains. We walk around, and we see the airborne track. We're walking on, and somebody's like, get off my effing track. And I'm like, well, I'm back in the Army now. And so I'm getting yelled at. And so then the next day, this is like straight out of a Hollywood movie. They're like, the enlisted guys show up, the NCOs enlisted, and you've got guys, long hair, pink hair, purple stuff, everywhere, all over the place. And I'm like, oh, good Lord, we're all going back together. And so then they're like, okay, guys, everybody's get a haircut. And, of course we did. And they're like, officers got to go buy your uniforms, enlist it. We'll take you down to the central issue facility. And I'm like, what? Seriously? Yeah. I don't get any uniforms? And so they're like, yeah. So we buy like 2 uniforms, and we ended up getting it later, which upset me because I bought one too many. But so I get a couple uniforms, and so nothing much. They feed us, and they're like, hey, tomorrow we're going to be down here at 6 a.m. I'm like, okay, we're back in the Army, 6 o'clock in the morning. That makes sense. So we're down there, and they're like, and we get down there at 6 a.m. I still remember this. The company commander comes out, and some captain. He's probably happy to be there, and he's like dealing with the IR folks, and he's like
these fucking people.
I
can't even imagine what that is.
I don't know what he said, but I do remember this. He goes, gentlemen, or he goes, men. He's like, we're gonna take a drug test, and he goes, and everybody's like, ugh, and so we're like, I'm like, whatever, okay, I buy drugs, but he's like, we're gonna take a drug test. He's like, if anybody has ever used drugs in the last 30 days, raise your hand. And there's like one person raised their hand. He goes, okay, this is the only time in your Army career this is gonna happen. If you ever think you've seen drugs, if you've ever used drugs, if you've been around drugs, he goes, raise your hand, and he goes, we're going to put you through a 3-hour class. And he goes, and then we're going to drug test you. He goes, if you pass it, he goes, you're fine. If you fail it and you've raised your hand and identified, nothing will happen. He goes, if you don't identify and you fail the drug test, we're going to take your money, we're going to take your rank, and we're going to still send you to Iraq. And then it's like everybody's saying, and I was like, oh my gosh. But a lot of people did it just because of out of paranoia. They weren't really doing it. And most of them were all great Americans. There was a few people that didn't want to be there. And then we get shipped off to, we train, shoot some, as they say, shoot some guns, roll around the mud. and do whatever for 2 weeks. And, you know, we get a common access card, which is a CAC. I didn't know what they were talking about. And so we go down to Fort Hood to meet our unit, his infantry unit. And we get off the bus, and, you know, all the officers are on the bus for whatever reason, probably just because typical nobody likes this. But we get off the bus, and the battalion commander just looks at us, and we're all a bunch of captains. He's like, all right, all the officers line up. And he goes, platoon leader XO, that company, platoon leader XO, that company, BMO, assistant S3, electronic warfare officer.
There was nothing at all about
literally just, he's appointed, and I'm like, all right, I'll be the highest paid platoon leader there is. And then we're like, well, what are we doing? And he's like, oh, we're running convoys throughout Iraq. And I'm like, oh, man. I'm like, oh, for a year? And so I don't even know if I should share this on the news, but I'll on the podcast, but I'll share it. Why not? Kind of a funny story. And so I'm literally like, you got to be kidding. So we train with our guys. I get this platoon, and I'm like, you know, half of them are from American Samoa, and the other half are IRR guys. And the guys are like, I don't want to be here. So there was like a handful there. It's like, I don't want to be here. And finally, I just had it. I was like, I don't want to be here either, but we're going to do our job. And if you don't do your job, we're going to get killed. I said, there's nobody else out here. We're running convoys. All we're going to do is avoid IEDs this entire time. I was like, that is our mission. It's not a traditional infantry mission, but that's what we're doing. We're running convoys throughout all Iraq, bringing stuff in and out of Kuwait, going through, I've been to Gary Owen, all the way up to the place. So we know our mission. And I remember I had this one kid, and I won't say his name, but he ended up being a great soldier. And he comes up to me, and he said, hey, sir, I don't give a blankety blank what you have to say. He goes, I don't even care. You can take my ranking, do whatever. And I looked at him. I'm like, and I said, we'll just call him John at the time. I said, John, you're going to listen to me. He goes, no, I'm not. I said, John, if you don't listen to me, I'm just going to beat the ever-loving crap out of you. Except for I unloaded it. He goes, you can't do that. I said, yes, I am going to do that. And there was a guy, staff sergeant, he was an LAPD cop. And I said, he's going to beat the crap out of you. And I said, I'm a police officer. I'm an officer. And he's a police officer. And we're going to tell him you swung at us first. And I said,
that's what we learned in the IR.
Yeah, that's what we learned in the IR. And I said, I'm just going to beat the crap out of you. And he's like, all right. And so then,
what do you want me to do? So
then he ended up listening. And then it was like 6 months into deployment. Like, hey, sir, would you have beaten the crap out of me? And without hesitation, I was like, yes, I would have. and I was like, obviously you could never do that now, and I'd probably get fired. But you know, it was a leadership decision. It was like, you know, you don't want to be there. And I knew I was leaving.
It was funny. You're a little bit ahead of, but I was in Knox at the time, and they were involuntary mobilizing, not IRR, but they were involuntary mobilizing reserve officers. I was in the U.S. Army Reserve, and you know, there had been some stories of like when I showed up there, like. Nobody, I remember walking up there and like a major walking up to me and was like, thank you for your service. And I was like, sir, you're in the Army too. And they're like, man, if they try to send me over to Afghanistan or Iraq, he's like, I'll just go to Canada or I'll bulk on. I joined, like, in my reserve unit was interesting. Like, I was like the first time I saw, it was ACRC unit. So you active component reserve. And these, like, ton of these people, they literally will tell you, I joined the military for the education. I didn't think I was going to deploy anywhere. Well, most of the time when they deployed, it was to like Fort Sill to mobilize units, or you know, to Fort McCoy. And I was a team chief, they call it, the captain, and I had a reserve officer as a major. That was the team leader, right? And then we had an E7 and stuff. So, you know, we were the active duty guys. We're there every day, like 9 or 10 of us. And my XO was like, "Hey, come to my office real quick." I'm like, shit, what I do? Like, you know what I mean? You're like, sure. I didn't come to PT because nobody went to PT back then. It was like, you know, it was like, what did I do? So he shows up. He's like, oh my God, like one of the officers, one of these captains got mobilized, involuntary mobilized. He's a quartermaster officer. I'm like, ooh, like, I'm sorry, he was a transportation officer. I was like, whoa. And he's like, and I'm like, are they doing this? It was like when they started, you know, they assigned this guy to some transportation unit in like New Jersey. Like they needed people, they mobilized them. This guy has no idea. He's a school teacher, right? He wasn't the greatest officer, if you're being honest. But so at the time, I'm like, all you motherfuckers need to have experienced what we did. Like you joined the Army at the time, to do what we did. And so I am so happy to be like, hey, sir, let me tell him. Let me call him in. Let me tell him what's happening, like what's going on. He's like, oh, we should, you know. So I call this guy. We'll call him Captain Glenn. And I'm like, hey, man, you need to come to the unit. The guy's like, man, drills in a couple weeks. Can I come to the unit then? I'm like, Glenn, you like really need to come to the unit today. Like, when can you be here? He's like, oh, I'm at school. School's over at 3:30. Like, be there at 4. I'm like, perfect. We'll be here at 4 o'clock. He's like, someone's going to be there. I'm like, oh, we're going to be here. So my NCOIC was there, and then the XO's there as well. So he comes in and he's like, what's going on? And I'm like, here you go. Like the big packet, like here's the big packet, hand it to him. And I remember him looking at it, and he started like bawling, crying. Like the guy was like having an emotional breakdown about you're getting, like this is like you're deploying, you know where you're going, like the following orders, whatever. And I remember just being like, what's the problem, Glenn? He's like, I didn't join the military to do this. I'm like, what did you join the military for? He's like, you don't understand what's going to happen. And I remember like looking at him, and my XO, he was an MP officer. And I look at him and I was like, hey, and he hadn't deployed yet. I was the only person that had deployed, in the war on terror. And I was like, one or two things are going to happen, Glenn. Like, one is you're going to die. And he's like, why would you say that to me? I'm like, dude, that could happen to you. You might die. Like, right. And I was like, and the other thing that's going to happen to you is you're going to go there, you're going to do your job, you're going to understand why you joined the military, which is either you're going to see this through to 20 years, or you're going to realize that you made a mistake and you're getting out. Right. And he just is like, I never forget that. I empathize like how you feel, because at the time when I think about it, I'm like, I was a huge asshole to do that. You know what I mean? To say that to him, but it was the reality of it. You're going to go do that. It was 2004. Things weren't going great. You know what I mean? And I'm like, and I remember leaving, and my XO was like, I told him would have handled that a little bit differently. I was like, I mean, are those the things that are going to happen? He was like, well, why would you? I'm like, I told him what's going to happen. You know what I mean? So it was crazy, but he ended up coming back, right, safely, thank God, because I would have felt horrible if that would happen to him. But he ended up getting out of the military after that, which is good, because he realized this isn't.
Yeah, it's not for everybody.
Yeah, he wasn't signed up. He was there for like the weekend, 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year, and that time has changed. We talked about this on the podcast. If you watched it, like absolutely. The reserve times have changed, and the guard has changed, and you should know that more than anyone else. I mean, we could talk about it, but I mean, since your career changed, we can fast forward a little bit. You went to 2010. You go Title 10 and become full-time AGR. Correct. And in that time, how many times have you deployed? How many times have you PCS?
PCS 10 times
in 12 years,
and 3 overseas assignments. I mean, it's insane.
That's a great decision you made, by the way.
Yeah,
that was one of the questions. Like, do you look at that? Did you think that was going to happen?
No, I had no idea. Everybody's like, oh, you're AGR, you can stay in one place. And I was like, oh, this is great. I'll go to Hawaii, and I'll be there for 8 years or whatever. And then, and I had no qualms about coming back to the military. And to back up just a step real quick, those folks that came off the IR and deployed for that during the surge, the 08, 09, you talk about Patriots, some of the best Patriots I've ever met. Because most of them, 95% of them went back to their civilian job and did it without any questions, and just did a bang up great job. I say the funny ones, but the other ones were, that one story, but everybody else was extremely professional. Now, jumping to the AGR program. Yeah, I think I've PCS 10 times, and to include America, Samoa, Hawaii, and Germany.
Now these PCSs, they're
full PCSs.
Are they for like, are you looking for PCSs, or could you have maybe like, so from what I know, the AGR, did somebody put that up on you guys?
What?
Oh, thank
active
you.
guard
It's
reserve.
about time these guys behind the scenes are doing some shit.
They're doing something right.
Yeah, so it's active guard reserve. It's the U.S. Army Reserve component.
So what I'm not. So Title 10 means is federalized. So it's active duty, but I work for the Army Reserve full time. So I have the same pay scale, same benefits as an active duty soldier. The AGR and the National Guard is Title 32, which is owned by the state. That's just the main difference. PCS, permanent change of station.
So where have you been for 23 episodes with acronyms?
Yeah. So
wow.
Are we got a guard guy here?
No, he's an Ohio guy. Ohio guy. But like he knows all this stuff, and like this makes me say it.
So yeah, I went for a couple times. Like when I was out in Hawaii, I left early for the captain's career course, so I had a PCS for that. I was selected for a company command, so a PCS for that. I got selected for resident command and general staff college, so I had a PCS for that. And then, got nominated to go to HRC again. I'm glutton for punishment, went there and, got picked up on the command slate list for battalion commanders in AGR. So I
You're
left
just blowing
early.
through years real quick. You're just like,
I'm blowing through.
He just blew through like,
but the
12 years. He's like, boom.
I've blown through some of that stuff because it's not. Most AGRs just like active duty.
Yeah.
And most officers PCS 2 to 3 times.
Yeah, in AGR, like in all defense of what you're talking about, that Guard Reserve people, if I remember them from when I was at Knox, they've been there forever. Like they literally don't leave. So it was interesting when I saw that, because I remember last time when I texted you, when you're looking through your bio, you're trying to figure out what's like. I'm like, that's what I thought you were, and you kind of figure out what's going on. But it's always interesting to do. But like somebody in that job, you never expect. There's few active duty people that are in 12 years of deployed. I've PCS 10 times.
I think I've probably PCS more than anybody that I know in the last 10. I mean, in the last 10 years or whatever since 2010, and that including any composition there is.
Yeah.
Maybe that's good, maybe it's bad.
Well, you talked about the captain's career course before we keep going.
Sure.
So infantrymen, you go to the MP captain's career course. So you're like, going to win my dad's heart a little bit. My dad was an MP.
Yeah.
He always said how much he hated MP officers, though. Right?
So the second worst place on earth, right? I think is Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, next to Fort Polk. So I went
Unless you like hunting.
Oh my gosh, that place.
Everybody. Josh was actually one time, who's behind the scenes, he was in the military. He's always like, every time you're on here, all you guys talk about in the Army is how shitty places were. I'm like, to be honest with you, every place in the Army is shitty. Like, well, if you're really thinking about it, you're
with
like,
the exception of Germany and Hawaii, because Hawaii, I used to be at Hickam all the time, which is Air Force.
Yeah.
And then actually Colorado, because when I was with Space, but is that Army? No, I'm just kidding. It is. But and then Germany was amazing. That was absolutely phenomenal. But you're right.
I did grow up in Germany. Like my dad was stationed there, was cool. But I didn't go to Germany because I was worried about being far away from everybody. You know, man. Like I would have went to Germany. I wish I had done that.
That was the best assignment location I've ever had.
And you were at K-Town, Kaiserslautern?
Yeah, Kaiserslaughter's the highest concentration of Americans outside the United States.
Yeah, we were stationed. My dad was stationed at Grafenwehr.
Yeah, okay. I know where that is.
Graf.
Not too far from Czechia, Czech Republic.
I remember going the first time
to
the wall and seeing you remember that trip that? It's interesting when you're young, like to Germany, and I actually work for a German company now, so it's pretty the company before I worked at a German company, so it's just how shitty it is. That's what matters. No, it is. I mean, like if you're really honest, like you're right. Germany is good. There's great assignments like Italy, but like Fort Bragg, Fayetteville is really not great.
That's
I mean, I'm gonna be like, oh, it's really not. Fayetteville sucks.
I've spent a lot of time there, and it is the center of the universe. It's I think
it's the center of the airborne community. It's the center of your branch too. So
it's the center
we're blowing through a lot of stuff. Like I think the important thing I want to talk about. I think
sure.
So he was an MP. He's done all kinds of stuff. But currently, right now, he's a battalion commander with the 412th Civil Affairs Battalion Airborne.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and one of the funny things about Charles is the pictures he sent. I was like, I got to get like a ritual of like what I ask people. Like I'm just really like casual about it. I'm like, send some pictures, a couple pictures. I need 8 to 10. Charles just sends like the most pictures I've ever gotten. I have more pictures of Charles on my phone right now than my kids.
That's good.
And they're all 99% of them are airborne, which is what I thought was great.
Listen,
I was like, I'm not hating though. You know, I'm looking at the pictures and I find myself like zooming in. I'm like, never jump with that chute. That reserve parachute is different than the one I use. But we asked last night, he was bitching about jumps getting scratched, right? So how many total jumps you had? What's your number of jumps?
I think I'm at 20.
That's it?
Well,
all those pictures?
Hold on, time out real quick. So let me take a step back. I had 5 jumps in 2002 when I went to airborne school.
Right.
And I took over command in July of 2021, and I have 15 jumps with a unit. So that's a lot of jumps.
Yeah, we're giving people a hard time. I mean, like,
that's a lot.
This is the most fun to have somebody that's airborne. Like, so in the military, we call like to do like a lot of people are airborne qualified, which is 5 jump chumps.
Yeah,
right?
5 jumps.
They go to airborne school at Fort Benning, and this is a tip I'm going to tell everybody, for all the people, because I've had it happen before. If you're talking to someone and they tell you that they went to airborne school and it was not at Fort Benning, Georgia, they're lying to you. They're full of shit. They're stolen.
Unless they're in the Air Force.
No, they all basic airborne.
They do some airborne stuff in the academy.
Basic airborne.
Well, you're right.
School,
Basic
airborne school is always at Fort Bragg. Like if you're a Navy SEAL, right?
Fort Benning.
I'm sorry. It's at Fort Benning. You did. I hit my head. I've hit my head a lot, like actually, but no, but Fort Benning is where it's at. So since World War II, right? It's been happening. So like even a Navy SEAL who's doing all this kind of stuff, their basic airborne training was at Fort Benning with everybody else. So that's one tip. If you know someone's full of shit, ask them where they went. Which I can't believe. I've had somebody like tell me one time at a bar that they went to airborne school at Fort Bragg, and I was like, "No way!" And the guy's like, "I know what I'm talking about."
I don't know why you'd lie about going to airborne.
I'm like, I don't know what you're.
Most people don't want to jump out of an airplane. I mean, you have a few screws loose if you like it.
I mean, my dad said he would never do it. Like I remember. One of my it's the airborne thing. We haven't went into detail, but one of my favorite things of my dad was actually my dad's a 24 year veteran. 20 what? 20 years. It's more than 20.
There you go.
With Vietnam now it's at
20 years.
I hype him up a little bit. Let's go 20 more.
It's almost 3 years.
He's like back there. He won't come on the podcast, so we would know that. I'd have it on the notepad here, but my dad's a Vietnam veteran, and like one of the things about jumping out of airplanes, my dad was always like, this is crazy. So my dad, if you've probably seen it, you guys do it here. Like, we called them fun jumps at the time, proficiency jumps, middle of the day, the family comes out there. They're like all excited about their airborne guy. Like they're, like jumping out of the plane. And I remember my mom and my dad and my wife and Ben, who's my oldest son, is 22. You guys saw was an infant. And they come out there and middle of the day at Bragg jump. As soon as we land, some dude is screaming at the top of his lungs, for the medic. You go over there, guy's leg is like broken beyond belief. And so our job is like, okay, it's not my job. You yell medic, you go out. And so I remember walking up to my mom. My mom's like, did someone get hurt? I'm like, yeah, this guy broke his leg. My mom's like, well, how do you know? I'm like, his leg was like mangled. I mean, like, she's like, what did you do? I'm like, what do you want me to hold his hand? I don't know. I don't, it's not my job. But then I remember visiting my dad, looking up and like going like, you guys have got to be and one of my friends, Slade, was jumping with us, and he was like, you got to be the dumbest sons of bitches I've ever seen. Because if you've never seen a static line airborne operation, people don't realize how low 1,100 feet is. And I remember my dad said something about, I feel like I could throw a rock and hit that plane. I was like, maybe not. I mean, but it is super low. If you've never seen that, it's pretty crazy. So, but I feel like everybody wants to jump out of airplanes. It's like a joke in the military.
It is fun, but but anybody who says they're not nervous to jump out, they're kind of, you get the apprehension, you get the nervousness, then it's the excitement, and then you want to do it all over again, and it's kind of addicting. But kind of going back to your thing where you say you only have this many jumps, which is,
I got to give you a hard time.
It is funny, but I to be fair, which is funny,
he's like,
when I got selected for command, I was like, I'm going an airborne. When I started laughing, I was like, I haven't jumped out of an airplane since 2002.
I had to give a hard time about this.
So what were you gonna say? So I literally went up there.
I had to give you that, like,
the funny thing is you can show. Oh, yeah. That's his little jump master. So what he's trying to make fun of me is that he can push people out the plane.
We're not allowed to touch anybody. You don't physically put your hands on anyone.
So I may have been told that this may have happened. That somebody wasn't jumping out on the second pass, was the first door, and they may have helped him and kicked him out of the plane. And but hey, you know what? Sometimes
I can say I never physically put my hands on anyone to exit an aircraft. However, I was the same people are talking about. I had a soldier who we're at the 82nd, so it's funny. You're at the 82nd.
Yeah,
you do 5 jump. You're gonna go and you're gonna do airborne operations. So this kid comes up to me as a commander, was like, I'm not feeling this airborne like paratrooper thing is what he originally said. Call himself a paratrooper, and you're like, you've only had 5 jumps. You're not a paratrooper yet, but so you want to be a jerk to them and like say like they have to jump. If you don't, like, people don't know, if you refuse in the aircraft to jump, it's a bad thing. We're not going to get into that, but you can't do that. It's very bad, unless of course you feel like there's a legitimate safety risk to you, like your equipment's bad or something. But
that's the one thing nice about the reserves. So we've never had that issue. And a matter of fact, we actually jump more than the 82nd Airborne.
Listen to me.
Here we go. We do. And we actually get more aircraft. We actually got more aircraft.
I believe, yeah. I believe
any battalion in the 82nd, we've gotten more aircraft. And what's kind of wild is I joke about it, but as you know, as a battalion commander, I'm not the subject matter expert, and I'm not even the airborne commander in charge of it. I mean, I can shut it down, but I'm not in charge of the actual operation. But the professionals that we have, like especially within the Army Reserve, that these guys, they dedicate so much time, and the standards are the same. And the Advanced Airborne School comes out to observe us. Well, they usually observe us when we're in Florida and not in jumping in Indiana. I don't know, conveniently, but people come out and observe us. But we've had the opportunity. We've jumped out of a UH-60, CH-47, C-130, C-17. We did in Joint Base Cape Cod.
What's your favorite aircraft?
C-17 without a doubt, because there's what they call is a wind deflector, so it's a smoother exit. But actually, if you really want to get down to it, it's a C-130 over the ramp because it's the easiest jump. And we're actually going to do one in March. We're going to do a deliberate water jump into, and that's what's nice about the reserve.
They're talking about the great jumps. This is the thing about civil affairs. He's exactly right. They have the fun jumps. They have a lot better aircraft. Like I remember my neighbor was actually a special forces officer. So they're the guys that like, hey, do you want to come to jump out of the Cessna or like, so the 82nd is normally like combat equipment, C-130, C-17. So I think I've had one water jump, and then the second one I gave up to a platoon sergeant who found out I was going to go, and he was like, he walked in with his jump log. Do you still have
we have jump logs.
Jump log. He brings it in, and I remember it dropping on my desk. He's like, "Need you to take a look at this?" And I was like, "Okay." Or like we are worried about jump pay or whatever. He's like, "It's like you thumb through this, sir, and see how many UH-60 water jumps I have in my career. I've been at 82nd for 12 years." I'm like, "Let me take a look at that real quick." He looked at it, and he's like, 0. And he's like, "Yeah, exactly." He's like, "So you're," and he's like, "I heard you have a line on one." And he's like, "And you're going." I'm like, "Yes, I'm not going." Which is, if you don't know what you're talking about, it's just a lot more fun to do.
It is.
It's fun.
And there's a purpose to it as well. It's just not for fun, but I think that's the nice thing about civil affairs. So we had 3rd Special Forces Group with us, 3 ODAs with us in Joint Base Cape Cod. And they did some jump master duties with us, and they did high altitude low opening that we so it's a higher jump. We set that up for them, and then I've jumped with 20th Special Forces Group, the National Guard unit down in it was one of the.
Where are they out of the 20th?
So I jumped with the one out of Louisville. They're split throughout. They're split.
Yeah, they're all over the.
They're all over. It's like 19th and 20th.
Where's the headquarters at though? That's what I've always.
I'm not sure where their headquarters was. I just went out, and they were awesome. They were great. Yeah. And then we're going to jump with Sock South. They'll jump with us when we go down to Miami Beach. We're going to jump into Key Biscayne. So in March, we'll take our entire battalion.
I know he's smiling over. There's like all these great.
Well, I'll tell you, this is where the difference is with the Army Reserve is, if we can do it, we're going to execute it. And so we're going to bring it in March 2. Right now we have 3 C5s, so probably one of them will break down. Let's be honest. We'll have 2 C5s, 2 C17s.
Probably 2, but.
Yeah, maybe. But we've utilized them before, and we've utilized them for a 3-day, what we call battle assembly. We utilized them, I think, 3 times. We brought them to Cape Cod. They're great to work with. They're out of Travis, and they're out of Dover. So nobody ever tries to, say I was a C5 pilot. I mean, I've never met anybody that fakes it. It's always a Navy SEAL.
Well, it's funny. I grew up at Newburgh at Stewart Army Subpost, which had the New York Air National Guard, which had C5s. There was remember that, Dad? Like all the C5s. It's great. Like I've told some story. Yeah, if you've never seen this, there's no way that thing should be flying. It's like the most jacked up thing. But do you remember, Dad? We probably get in trouble. But do you remember they would always be bringing shit back? Remember they would be selling and bringing stuff back. It was hysterical. Like the C5, they would go. And if you don't know that, like with Joint Air, like even if you were at Bragg, honestly, if you were, what I'm talking about, like if you're at Bragg. And you were flying 5 C-17s.
Yeah.
They could come from all over the United States. They weren't necessarily there. They came from all over. So these are pilots that flew in from, let's say Washington, and you're like, you show up and like you made a joke about it with aircraft. They show up to jump paratroopers, 5 of them, and like 2 of the aircraft were broke. They knew that before they left.
Yeah,
they still brought them anyways, because. Whatever the big picture is, but the C5s are an amazing aircraft. I think it's truly
remarkable how much weight they can take off with. I think we took off with 175,000 pounds or something insane. Just put on there, and it's the largest aircraft in the Department of Defense. So we've been fortunate, blessed, whatever the right word is, to be able to
Are
utilize
you're
it.
not jumping from that though?
No, you can't.
Yeah,
You
they
actually,
used to, a long time ago they did.
a
They
long
stopped.
time ago they did, but
Yeah.
the jets were too powerful, and so it's C-17 or C-130. And so yeah, we'll take a couple of those, take what we call our rolling stock, which are Humvees, and put them back to the C-5s. We'll fly in the Homestead Air Reserve Base south of Miami, and then we'll take off there and do an over the ramp jump into Key Biscayne, which is Miami Beach.
Look at him.
And then we have you like
he's
that.
like, what are you doing, Scheck?
But you know it's funny. And so we have all the Coast Guard. We have Coast Guard cutter, the 7th Coast Guard district out there, and they're going to shut down the whole harbor. Department of Natural Resources, Miami-Dade County. And it's a lot of work for 3. You know, if you think about it, 72 hours.
I thought you just jumped in some lake at Bragg and you'd be fine, like we did. It's like
So I have jumped at Bragg twice, and
what drop zones?
Green. I did Green Rise, Sicily, and what's the other one? I think it was Sicily both times, and it was. I wasn't, it was toy drop, and I was like, I don't know if you heard of that. It was. They had a bunch. It was fun, but I was like, the drop zone is not the best. The best drop zone I've ever been on is Camp Atterbury, Indiana. It's flat.
Never done that.
It's got it's a great one. They have Muscatatuck. It
depends if you want to talk shit. Like, there's nothing like having a huge FLS in the middle of the drop zone that you land on.
Yeah,
I think they should be dropping you guys.
That's Fort Bragg.
I think they should drop you at Rickenbacker so someone can land on. You civil affairs guys can hit the runway.
I used to jump there. Yeah, I actually will not jump there. I think I'm not going to jump on the tarmac. But I did jump into what they call is Miami-Dade, Dade Collier Airport in Miami. But it's not Miami. It's in the middle of the Everglades, and it's the most narrow drop zone they have, and it's surrounded by swamp. And literally, I remember we took off, and in the first, we're an MC6 with a steerable chute. So I steer there the first time. I'm good. Some people end up in the swamp, and they have these pontoon boats and these dune buggies. And I don't even know if it's legal. We're paying them probably in beer to get people out of there, and they love it. They're patriots, and they go out there and pick people up. So then we do a night jump, and we jump there, and I don't consider myself a VIP or a DV, but they're like, oh, we're going to do a DV pass. I'm like, oh, that's cool. Who's on it? They're like, well, you are, sir. You're one of our guests. You're Lieutenant Colonel. So they threw out some other Lieutenant Colonel and myself. So I got out the door first. There was like just 4 of us. I'm like, it's weird. So we jump out the door, and all of a sudden, like I land, it's pitch black. And I barely made it on the drop zone. I can barely tell. And I'm like, all of a sudden I started hearing this noise, like all these things. And I'm like, and the safety brief, I've never heard it. They're like, you got to be careful because there's bears, there's panthers, there's like cougars. I'm like, cougars. And then they're like, there's pythons, there's alligators, there's all kinds of snakes. I'm like, well, that's cool. What else is there? And they're like, basically don't land off the drop. And I'm hearing all these noises, and I just take my knife. I'm like, who's there? And I'm like, what am I doing? I'm like, I'm by myself. So I'm like, you're a moron. So I probably destroyed the parachute, pulled it in. And then all of a sudden, it just started pouring down rain, and the plane took off, and all the stuff that you wrote. But
it's fun to have somebody that's airborne.
Yeah,
it's hard. It's one of the stories, like you said, it is funny. It's one of the it's so much fun, but it is nerve wracking, and you laugh about like off drop zones. But I think it's my second jump in division. Like the green light goes red, and you still want to get out the aircraft. That's a hard thing to explain. And you just leave anyways. Like no one's really stopping you at that point.
Nobody's
so you just
gonna stop
leave.
you.
And I remember and you've never done it before. It's like it's nighttime. Everything looks great. It's all these things, and then you start looking down, and you're like, man, I think I'm gonna hit that bush right there. And we're not. These aren't steerable chutes like he's talking about. These are like, nature does its course.
It brings you where it's going to go.
T10 Charlie. What is it now? What are they calling now?
So they have the MC6 and they have T11. So the T11 is
steerable.
No, the T11 is not. It's just going to bring you down. It's really heavy, and you can maneuver a little bit. Like you can pull a riser. I'm showing for the audience, and then the MC6 has the toggles which you can turn. And the MC6 is great, but if you don't know what you're doing, you can really injure yourself. Whereas the T11, if you don't touch it, matter of fact, I think Ranger Regiment, when they jump out with a T11, nobody touches it. They just go. They go where it takes it.
Yeah. That's what we did most of the time. You just run with it. If you had steerable chutes, you're right. Like there's a lot of things like the steerable chutes have a opening in the back, and it runs with the wind. And it's you gotta before you land, you gotta turn into the wind, a bunch of other stuff. But I remember seeing this, and I was like looking, like he's talking about just very like it's so casually, like just reach up and grab the risers, and it basically collapses the parachute on that end, so it moves. That's basically the way, and it really doesn't fucking work that great. I mean, to be honest with you. So I remember seeing this, I'm looking at, I'm like, oh, look at that, I'm gonna hit that bush, and then I make a couple checks and stuff. I was like, holy Christ, that's a tree. Like I'm like running into this tree, like, oh my God, this is gonna be bad. So you start just grabbing these risers. Like Charles is like just really like you grab and you've had the jump master brief, reach up and grab the risers, pull them deep in your chest and hold. Like, it doesn't work. I'm just telling you, it moves the parachute, but you're not like moving like you've seen or anything. And I remember, like, I'm like, holy fuck, I'm at this tree, and I hit this tree, go all the way through it, and it was the best landing I ever had. Like, I literally go through, and I don't even really like land. I like I get scratched up a little bit, and I'm like almost like land on my feet. Like, I collapse a little bit. I'm like, oh my god. So my parachute is just entangled in this tree. Like, there's no way I'm getting it out. Like, there's no way. Like, I try to pull it down. I'm like, this is crazy. So I, go to the assembly area, and I tell the person, I'm like, my chute is at the trail edge of the drop zone. It's in a tree. And so, 30 minutes goes by, 45 minutes go by. All of a sudden, this NCO is like, where's that captain who landed in the tree? I'm like, funny. I'm right here. He's like, are you sure you're at the trail edge of the drop zone? I was like, I'm positive I was at the trail edge of the drop zone. I'm like, it's in a fucking tree. And he's like, get in the LMTV, let's go. So we roll, we're in the LMTV, and it's, if you've never done airborne operations, a lot of people on the ground, they have no idea that they're even down there. This is like, he's driving me down there, and I'm like, he's like, I'm telling you, sir, we've been looking all over. I'm like, dude, it's a fucking parachute in a tree. How can you miss it? So we get down there, show it to me. He's like, I guess we did miss it. And I'm like, well, how are we getting this down? They literally attach it to the toe part of the LMTV and just rip it out of the tree. Like, the thing is ripping, it comes apart. And I'm like, and I'm thinking, like, am I going to be responsible for this? Like, no, the riggers leave a sew it, or it's not a big deal. I was like, so we're good. He's like, yeah, pack your, like, get put in the bag and move out. But you come back and you're literally the person that's been holding up everybody in the middle of the drop zone at like 11 o'clock at night. And I'm like, what was I supposed to do? But yeah, if you've never done it, it's such a crazy. It's like the most exhilarating time ever. I'm trying to explain to people. You can't terror. You can't. Yeah, I would say it's excitement, terror, fear, excitement, and then it's relief, and then it's excitement. I tell you, every time I go up there, and what's your least favorite part of it? Oh, people say, oh, I love being the number one jumper, and usually I am because I'm the commander, and as I should lead out the soldiers if we're going into a combat situation, but it's really not that fun for me because I'm looking there and I'm holding on. I got my hand over the reserve chutes that didn't pop out, and I'm watching. We go down to 1,100. Then you can feel like the plane slows down, and you're at 1,100 feet, and you're looking at houses, and they're zipping past, and you're like, then it's like go, and you're just like, all right, I guess I'm going, and then you just go, and you're like, okay, I hope the chute opens up because I don't want to burn it and die. And then you're like, once the chute's open, you're like, I don't want to break my legs. I don't want to break my legs. I don't think anything else like. 4 points of content or anything. Yeah, I think the worst part for me was always landing. Oh yeah, so landing. I'm a big guy now. I was bigger at the time, and I don't know if you remember like Fear Factor, like the old Fear Factor. They said that camera that would like show on people's face. I am not lying when I tell you when I was like holding to land, I would out loud being like, please don't let me break my legs, please. Like I would out loud be. That was my biggest fear was to like. Yeah. If you've ever seen it, it's awful. Like, and you don't really have any control of it. That's what people don't realize. Like the steerable chute's a little bit better landing, but the other ones, it's just like you're at the will of the wind, whatever you're landing. And there's not a lot. Yeah, it's like and it is awful. But like when you land, like I remember so many times like landing, and you're like so thankful. You're like, oh my god, this is great. Like I mean, it is but if it were not for landing, like so, like jumps, like the one water jump I had. Mm-hmm. And the one water jump I had, that was the only jump I wasn't worried about landing. Other than that, the landing, everything else I was okay with. The number one jumper is great. You see it all. You're like, fuck yeah. Like he's like playing like he's like timid. You're standing there. You're in a high performance aircraft. Yeah. And you're like, there's some guy like it's just I don't know. I think that's the best. The number one jumper is the best. I mean, it's wild, but it's and you think to yourself like, what in the fuck am I doing? Well, you're like, I should. Every time I'm up there, I'm like, why didn't I join the Air Force? Because there's like a thing that says Army out and Air Force in, and you're just sitting there like, what are we doing? But it is a lot of fun. But for me as a commander, I'll be honest, I'm actually more nervous when I hit the ground for everybody else. And you talk about. Like the burden of command and stuff like that. The best jumps I've ever had is when I'm not in charge of it, or if I'm a guest jumper, what we call it. So if I go to another unit and I jump, I love it because I don't have to worry about it. If I have my soldiers, I'm worried about it. I'm worried about people in general. When you're own operation and you know everybody, and you have that camaraderie with people, and you're responsible for them, that's where
it gets a little nervous, and not because you want to get in trouble or anything. You just don't want your folks getting hurt.
Well, yeah, it's a serious
Yeah.
That's funny. When I graduated from Jump Master School, it was funny. Like, you know what I'm talking about. It's the whole process is like,
right.
If you've never been to airborne school, like everything is so fast. Like they just teach. It's like there's like jumpers hit it. Like there's like you and I will do like a reaction that's like it's just ingrained in you, and it's so fast. But like when when I went to Jump Master School, it's funny. It slows it down a little bit because you understand the process more, and it gets more scary because you're able to like see what's happening. You're able to see like that. You're exactly right. Whether you're a commander or not, if you've been to like an AJ or like a jump master on an aircraft, it's scary because all these people, you're responsible for them. You're responsible for that this JMPI, the jump master personal inspection. Like you're the last person that's like, okay, everything you have on looks good, and it is nerve wracking, and like there is that feeling of. You are worried about it, but then that last 50 feet for me is always still the worst. Like I was like,
oh yeah,
it's just I can't. If you've never done it, it's
and it really is. I'll tell you, it makes so being an airborne unit, and not because I'm the commander. I think it's almost the only thing I can say I've had more camaraderie with is really when I was in combat during OIF-1, and because the trust that you go in there. Because in reality, you could have somebody somebody could die on a jump, somebody could get seriously injured, and you literally are putting somebody's life, you're putting your life in somebody else's hands. And people say, oh, it's just jumping out of an airplane. It's not. They call it a calculated air rate progression, I think is what it is. So when the plane is going, and it's going at a certain speed, at a certain angle with a wind direction, and when you're going to come out. And if you put somebody out, the winds are too high, or if you're going at the wrong rate and you send them out early or late, the drop zone detail.
Yeah, people get hurt.
People get hurt, and it's serious business. And we're pretty serious in the battalion. And I make, there's, tons of pre-checks and briefs that I take. But when you jump out of a plane with somebody, unless you've done it, you really can't explain that feeling and that mutual trust that you have. And obviously it's exhilarating, it's exciting, but. We're doing it for a reason. It's a capability. It's not our mission, not my mission, but
it's actually a capability that's been getting a lot of heat lately. Like I love you see a lot of memes of people criticizing like what's the need of the 82nd Airborne Division and all these airborne units. And I'm kind of like, to you guys, fuck you. Like, but no, it is funny. Like, I know now that like even some of the people in the 82nd not everybody in the 82nd is airborne qualified now. There's been some changes since I got out, which is different. But yeah, you're right. That's what I thought was the greatest part about being in an airborne community is like whether you were a cook, a truck driver, everybody was airborne, and one time every 90 days you guys went through the same stuff. And it is. I love it. I mean, I love doing it. Would I do it today? Maybe the water jump, but if I hit the ground now, I'd be like everything.
It hurts. I can tell you that.
It always hurt. Like I can't even imagine now. Like I see I can't imagine any of my friends that are like the 50s. Like I have a couple of them that are about to be general officers. I'm like, there is no way your ass is going to the 82nd. Like there's no way at 50 years old. But it makes you respect things because like at the time you're there, you see like. My division commander was General Bynes. I don't know if you've heard of General Bynes. Yeah. Absolute like stud. He
jumped out.
And but at the time when you think about it, he was in his 50s, and this guy had hundreds of jumps. He was out like you'd be on an airborne operation. Like I remember one time I was JMPIing. And, if you've ever been to the pack sheds, there's a bunch of people. There's a lot of stuff going on. You're trying to get some stuff, stand up and do this. And I'm trying to JMPI this guy, and somebody's like. It like behind me, like, so I pulled it like, hey, jump master working. You need to move. Like, if you're not JMPI, you need to move. And I turn around, and it's literally General Bynes. And I was like, I was like, oh. He's like, no.
Probably.
Captain, I'll get out of your way. I was like, oh. And so for the guy in JMPI, I'm like, you couldn't have told me that this was General Bynes that I'm yelling at. But that's what I'm saying is like sergeant majors that were. Yeah, they're late 40. Like I have a lot of respect because even like senior like even NCOs like in the 82nd, like your unit's a little bit it's different. But those guys, you say you jump more, but you have guys that have jumped and gals that have jumped 150.
Yeah, I've got a couple guys in my unit jumped over 100 times.
That's insane. That really is like when you think about the amount of
my sergeant major's jumped over 100 times.
He must talk a lot of shit too. He's having a great time.
No, he's a great
No,
guy.
I'm joking.
But he, it's
Sorry,
it's,
Major. Get him to Jump Master School. That's what. So when are you going to Jump Master School?
I'm
that's
in the
what
Army War College. I'm not going to Jump Master School anytime soon. You know, it's funny. My brigade commander and what we call civil affairs commander, 1-star division level, are both Jump Masters, and it's pretty awesome to see, like, General Sanders or Colonel Gannon, and they'll do Jump Master duties, and they've let us out. And it's pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
That's unique. You'll see like a 1-star performing JM duties, and you're like, what is going on here?
Yeah,
But it's wild. It's a neat community. It's small. It's tight. And it's almost incestuous because you see the same people over and over.
Yeah,
I see the 82nd all the time. Their guys come to our jumps. We send people down to them. We help them out with JM duties and stuff.
Yeah, we always laugh because that Bragg, the world rotates around Fort Bragg, right? Like,
it's the center of the universe. We've talked
for
about
civil
that,
affairs. It's like everybody like special forces, civil affairs, the home of the airborne, and like we always make a joke about the only real Jump Master school is at Fort Bragg, right?
Yeah.
If you went to Benning, everyone's kind of like, it's all right, and then like if you say you went to like one of the special forces, like Jump Master schools, were kind of like. But it is funny to watch. Like and Jump Master School is a fun school because if you never did, because it's a gentleman's course. No one's really yelling at you ever. But it's like they cram so much stuff so fast. Like I never.
It's intense.
And for most of the places, like to people don't know, is for you to command in the 82nd, you have to be a Jump Master.
Mm-hmm.
So if you get there and you can't graduate from Jump Master School, you're not going to be in command. Same thing as First Sergeant. You're not going to take a company, and it's funny. Like I think I went to Jump Master School with like 12 jumps, and I remember the first day sitting next to this E7, and I'm like, "How many jumps do you have, sir?" And he's like, 80 some. And I was like, "Shit." He's like, "How many do you have, sir?" I was like, 12. I'm like, "Oh my god, I'm gonna fucking fail." He's like, and I go, "Have you been to Jump Master School before?" He's like, "It's my 4th time." I was like, I'm definitely not graduating. It is one of the funniest things. Like it's a school that makes you question everything about yourself. It's like technique and like all this repetition. But I remember, like, if you've never done it, my wife, and kids, anybody that's had a family member that's done this, you're doing the craziest thing. Like you're putting your wife in a parachute harness, inspecting her. It's crazy. And I remember the night before the final test, I tell my wife, I was like, there's no way I'm going to graduate. Like every time in the circle, I'm not fast enough, all this kind of stuff. My wife's like, you're going to do this. You were destined to do this. You're going to go there tomorrow. You're going to become a Jump Master. And I was like, this is the most motivational speech. And I was like, that really feels good. And she's like, you know why? And I was like, why? She's like, because we cannot go through this school again. We cannot, this family cannot handle it again. And you're like, okay, but it is a community we love. In the airborne community, you love making fun of people who aren't Jump Masters.
Yeah.
If you're in the airborne community, you love making fun of people that aren't
legs. Yeah.
that aren't airborne. And like, so like, I know some guys that are listening, like they have their star and wreath so they can make fun of me. It's just it's like a fraternity. It's a big.
It is. And it's a small community, believe it or not.
Yeah.
And it's a fun community too. And probably some of the most professional people that I've been around. However, there's a lot of jokes in there as well, which is fun. Makes it a good time. I guess I got one thing for you real quick. So I got to plug in for our battalion. So we give out these patches. Anybody that jumps with us, actually anybody in the battalion, we give out one of our patches, the 412 Civil Affairs Battalion. And then anybody jumps with us that is a guest jumper or in the battalion, we give them one of these patches. It's a medallion. And you hook it on to your belt buckle or wherever. St. Michael's, which is the patron saint of paratroopers, protect us.
Let's see that.
And so right there, one of the verses is, if not me, then who? And so I'll give that to you. And every single one that I've ever handed out, I've actually jumped with. So not every one of them has been jumped out of one. So that one's been jumped out of Cape Cod, Massachusetts. That's been out of Dade Collier and Camp Atterbury and Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Last jump I did with that was at Fort Bragg.
So I have one of these that's smaller. The real small one that has more jumps than you.
That's all right.
So this means a lot to me. This is like, if you have never seen this before, I have this really small one that we always carried on most of us carried on our dog tags, which is awesome. That's really cool. You can actually read this one.
Yeah. So
which is nice. But
yeah, we give that.
I would say I
as
was
a
going to give you
gen-
that one, but there's no way in hell. There's
Yeah.
no way I'm giving you that one.
There you go. So that's
But,
one of our ones that we give those that support the community and those that jump with us. So there you go.
Thank you. See that, Dad? My dad's one of those people that would never. Would you ever jump out of an airplane? He said no. Dad, come on. What's going on? So let's more talk. We're talking about we're at 2 hours here. We got to get the second pitch in for the whiskey of the week, and then we're going to talk about. We got to talk about your civil affairs mission.
Okay.
Like not the airborne part, which is just a small thing. I think it's important, and we'll wrap it up after that.
Sounds good.
So you're still not drinking, but he's missing out on another really good pour that hopefully he can have after. I feel like you're like torn over there, like You should have listened to the lawyers. Lawyers always give you advice, as long as you're not breaking any laws. But we're gonna go. The next featured whiskey is we're gonna go with another barrel proof, or it's actually full proof, Weller full proof, which is. I brought this up to try to tie in what you brought in the barrel proof bottle you brought in. But if you don't know who Buffalo Trace is, you absolutely are not into whiskey. It's probably the number one.
Who?
Yeah, Buffalo Trace. Yeah, it's like we were talking about how everybody knows about Buffalo Trace. If you haven't, watched Yellowstone, they're promoting. But Buffalo Trace is located in Frankfort, Kentucky. It's actually owned by Sazerac. And they bought Buffalo Trace in 1992. It's been known by a ton of different names. George T. Stagg Distillery, Old Fire Copper, OFC Distillery. Its namesake bourbon right now is actually Buffalo Trace, which everybody goes crazy for. The company, the distillery claims to be the oldest continuously owned distillery in the United States. So it was one of the distilleries that actually was able to produce medicinal spirits during Prohibition. And actually Buffalo Trace, the name of the distillery where this comes from, is known. It refers to an ancient buffalo crossing on the banks of the Kentucky River down there in Franklin County. So Weller Full Proof is one of the last, like, I guess every year. That's not even true. Like it's CYPB, which you were talking about before, right? Is newer, I think. But in 2019, Buffalo Trace and Sazerac launched Weller Full Proof. The name full proof is kind of confusing when you talk about barrel proof. It's actually 114 proof. It doesn't refer to the barrel strength, and instead refers to the 114 proof is what the original distillate was when it went into the barrel. So that's one of the things that people don't know about full proof and barrel proof. It's interesting. So this mash bill is undisclosed. It's the wheated mash bill. Obviously, all the Wellers are, and some of the brands that people will know is the wheated mash bill is Pappy Van Winkle. Sorry, inside joke we have going. There's some other ones that they've done on the way. E.H. Taylor Rye, E.H. Taylor Seasoned Wood, and then all the Weller brands are obviously that same mash bill. And what's interesting about these, and Buffalo Trace is not the only one that does this, but it's the same mash bill for all these different brands. But depending on how old they're aged and where they're aged, it depends on where the product comes. But the Weller Full Proof that we have tonight that we're going to try actually comes from a good friend of the Pours with Patriots, the One Man Wolf Pack. Who do you think you are? I am, which is the sticker. It's a great sticker on that. It's an old, if you haven't seen it on the picture that we sent, but it's a great bowling incident that happened a few years ago. But this one's non-age stated. Generally, the Weller Full Proofs are anywhere from 6 to 8 years. 114 proof, and like I said before, the mash bill is undisclosed, but it's Buffalo Trace's wheated mash bill. So I want to thank Ryan for donating that and some of the other bottles that we've seen here in the past year or so. Thank you. Hopefully you can enjoy that after we get off. I think you guys are excited to try that one, right?
Yeah, we'll try that.
They're all waiting. Look at them. Look at them all like they're like fiends. See what I'm talking about? Fiends. I'm gonna seal this blend though, so I can give it to you, so you guys know. So as I'm pouring this, we'll wait for this for you after. But
sounds good.
So now you're civil affairs officer. You transitioned over a little while ago, right?
I did. 2011 actually.
So explain to everybody what the civil affairs mission is, like in your words. I mean,
so in layman's term, we are the liaisons between the military and civilians in pre, during, and post-conflict. And we'll do everything from transitional governance, which means transitioning governments, rebuilding, restoring essential services, foreign humanitarian assistance, and evacuating non-combatants off the battlefield. So if you're a maneuver commander, whether you're in the Marines, the Army, a lot of times you want to work with civil affairs for a couple of reasons. You want to see what the populace is thinking, who's friendly, who's foe, and we can certainly help facilitate that actually during conflict, like pre, during, and post. And the other portion is what civil affairs can do is because we can do a lot of veterinarian or medical capabilities that we can gain access to places that most people can't get to. And so civil affairs is, it's a great mission. It is dangerous because you're kind of alone and unafraid, but you can work it out of an embassy, you can work with the State Department, U.S. aid, or you could just be working in a permissive or semi-permissive environment where it could either be extremely dangerous or not. And you can work for the battle space owner, or you could be working for the embassy for missions. So it's kind of a unique thing. It's small. It's a little niche within the Army.
Part of the special operations community.
It is.
Right?
Yes, it is. I mean, so don't be confused. We're not special forces.
No, but I was hoping you were going to go the route. But there's a selection process, a different selection process. There's a lot of things that have to go into before you become, whether you're a civil affairs, active duty, officer, enlisted guy, as well as the reserves. I think but there is, you are part of that special. Because a lot of the times, like I remember, my first interaction was in Afghanistan, going out on ground assault. Was a civil affairs captain, team leader, he was a professor at Harvard University.
Okay, wow.
And this dude was unreal. I mean, the team, he had a team of guys, but he was the guy that I was with all the time.
Sure.
And dude, this guy was like literally making shit happen in the middle of nowhere. I mean, like you talked about, bridging the gap between things. Like we were there to fuck shit up. He was there to build the community, make it better, like see how we're working. And just watching this guy work and have the ability to just be calm under pressure, to be able to, most of the time, there's the one time that he went nuts, which is fine, but it was crazy. We had PSYOPs guys with us, we had us, and to watch him do his job of really trying to understand what was going on with the Afghani populace, what was going on, how to make it better, how to win their trust. Ultimately, it was pretty impressive.
And we pride ourselves in being adaptable, blending into the environment. And I think I said earlier in the podcast, but one of the great things about civil affairs is it's really not about rank. It's about knowledge and experience, and that rank doesn't get it for you. So if you have a small team and you have a team leader, is usually a captain, company commanders or majors, and your CAT, your assistant team leader is an NCO, and you have a CA NCO, could be, but whoever has that most rapport, and a lot of times people are like, oh, you're some cowboys or something like that, and sometimes they grow beards, and sometimes they get out of control, but we adapt to that environment. So, but the reason why a lot of times we'll be in civilian clothes is because we'll go talk to that elder, or we'll talk to the State Department, whoever has the best rapport, that's who's going to be in charge for the time being, and that's who's going to be the main speaker, and that could be a specialist, and I've seen it happen, where you'll have a captain and you'll have a sergeant first class and you'll have a sergeant, and that sergeant all of a sudden is kind of taking that lead because that's who's got the rapport and that's who's built it, and that's how we're going to go, which is unique because you'd never see that in the 82nd in the infantry. For the most part, you probably wouldn't.
No, you wouldn't see there's definitely the fluid, it's more fluid of who the person is, but my experience was that this guy was we thought he was like a rock star. It was unbelievable. The things he could offer too. That's what we realized. We were going and doing something else, and he's talking to a village elder and be like, we can build a well here in 2 days. He has these, he was doing something completely different than we were. Yeah. And these are people that are on your same team. It was shocking to me. It was because if you think about this is 2003. I'm sorry, 2003 and 2002, and it was we've never really worked with them before. You heard it's like we talked about earlier about close air support. We've never worked with civil affairs guys before, gals, and you see these people and you're like, what the fuck are they doing here? And you'd watch them, and it was like they had the ability to be like, this guy's a Harvard professor, so you automatically think he's maybe especially now in 2022, like, Harvard, a little bit liberal, all that kind of stuff. But this guy could be one of the nicest guys you ever met. But if you didn't do what he wanted you to do, like, it wasn't good for you. Like, I mean, he was literally, but he had that respect of the people that we went into. It was very clear what he wanted to do, what he wanted the team to do. And it was like sometimes I just sat back and was like, this is a cool ass job. I wish I had done this job.
Yeah, it is really a good job. We do fall under the Special Warfare Center. So it falls under the Special Operations Forces for doctrine. And so you have your SF, your psychological operations, and civil affairs. And it is a unique skill set. And it is a great mission, honestly. It's probably the most fun I've had in the Army. And you get a lot of autonomy. And that comes with a lot of, it comes with a lot of danger, and it also comes with a lot of, you get a lot of authorities too as well. And it really is fascinating to see how you can do that. The old adage is we used to joke around in combat is, coming from an infantry background, we'd say you have 7 enemy and eliminate 4, you have 12, because you upset more people. And so that was our motto. We'd say that a lot. And, not to sound bad, but sometimes you do have to go, lethal. But more often than that, when you start talking to people and you start breaking stuff down, you can really win that hearts and minds. Not to sound cliche, but if you work with people, you understand people, and you figure out who will work with you and who won't work with you. And if you do services or build a school or a hospital, it's not necessarily about building that school. It's about working with people, and so they know who the United States is all about, and then they're less apt to
it turns out 12. Yeah, no, it was crazy. I mean, I can't I honestly, that was when I always tell stories about it. It's always with him and what we were doing. It was crazy. I mean, like he literally had a different agenda than we did, but it was amazing that the caring of, and I did this quote before. He's like, do things for people not because of who they are and what they do in return, but because of who they are. And that's like and all the things we were doing. Like, I always remember watching him like there was a general care for fixing all the other things, because we weren't doing everything right. His job and his team's job was always trying to fix what we were doing. And it was just so admirable to watch him like meet someone for the first time that like literally hadn't seen an American ever in their entire life, honestly. And then walk up, and then within an hour and a half, we're in this guy's house and we're getting food, and they're bringing their babies to him. It was amazing to watch. That's the rapport that they would make so quickly with people. But I also did watch how quickly, if you didn't, they're a military occupational skill. You know what I mean? So there's they had intent to what they're doing. It was interesting to watch them. Like tough love, I would call it. Is that a good term? Is that a term in civil
that's where we delineate ourselves.
Love?
We delineate ourselves.
You have good love and then tough love. Like there was some tough love that was going down.
Yeah, I mean, you have to. I mean, you can't be, we're not the State Department, we're not the aid, USAID. And my sergeant major, as he always puts it, where I say we need to work on lethality, and he says, sometimes people need to get shot in the face. Sometimes you can't.
Well, no, I mean, this interesting. Like we were talking about one time where we're at, this village elder would not. There was there was 3 villages that were close, and what we found out is the one village elder had put an anti-tank mound down the well.
Okay. Yeah.
To punish his people. Like, it's crazy. So, you guys in civil affairs, all this stuff, and everybody was like, hey, all these people leaving this area. So we go in there, what's going on? The civil affairs guy's like, what are we doing? Like, what happened? This guy's all proud of these fucking people don't listen to me. So I just put a anti-tank mine down the well. And you're like, the fuck is wrong with you? Like, what is wrong with you? So he's launched into the mode of okay, we're going to get the anti-tank mine out. We're going to rebuild this well. We're going to build it. But you got to share with these 2 other villages. They need water too. And this guy was like, no, I remember with the interpreter, he's like, no, I'm not going to do that. And this guy was like, so far as officer was like, okay, here's what's going to happen. We're going to, no matter what, we're going to take the fucking mine out of there. And he's like, and he asked him again, we're going to help you. We're going to help you. We want to help you. But if you don't do this for us, we're done with you. And he was like, I don't care. And like we like walk off, and I'm like, this is crazy. When I helped, he was like, this guy's an idiot. Like he's not helping anybody. It was crazy to watch that. I wanted to be like, throw him in the well with the. No, I mean this is a leader.
Yeah.
This is a problem.
Yeah,
like, honestly,
sure.
like there's a part of like this is crazy. This guy did this to punish his people, and meanwhile people are dying. People are leaving the area. It's crazy, but it's a tough mission. And you did say like it's not. Charles is being. You guys are part of the special operations community. There's a selection process that goes. If you want to be a civil affairs soldier officer, you don't just say, "Hey, I want to do that." You go through selection.
Yeah,
There's a lot of like.
Down at Fort Bragg, Camp McCall, same location where SF.
And it mirrors a lot of the stuff they do. There's a selection.
Yeah,
process.
I mean it's different. Like we're not eating apples out of a trough like special forces, and we don't have.
Yeah, but it's. I mean, I think you're playing it off. I think it
is a difficult course. So Slush Tiller is a and I'm not going to get into that course because for anybody that's going to go, it's one of the more. It's very challenging. It's one of the most professionally run courses I've ever been to. There's a lot of money into it. There's role players. People speak stuff. You're drinking alcohol. You have any kind of scenario you could ever think of is there, and you deal with it, and they really see how you react to it. And if you can't handle it, or if you can't cut the mustard, then you're not going to be a civil affairs officer,
right.
And that's okay because not everybody needs to be one because you have to be adaptable and you have to be fluid. You have to be able to think on your feet. Because a lot of times you're alone and unafraid, as I've said before. And at one point in time, and it's not a good thing, but civil affairs had, I think, the highest casualty rate out of any branch in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Yeah.
It's primarily because you're out there.
You're with everybody.
Stuff, you're trying to make stuff happen.
Yeah, you're with. I mean, the time we didn't go anywhere without a civil affairs.
So it's
team.
important. And they're really doing great work. So it's an important mission.
And one of the things that I saw today, I didn't know this, but so reservists, you don't have to have a language specialty. Is that
so? We do have it. We do send people to DLI. It's not a requirement. But being an HRC too, and this isn't a knock on even the AC, but I'll see people with Mandarin and they're in Southcom. So it is. We have a lot of people with language capability. It's just not a requirement. We don't. That's the only difference between us. And there's regional studies and then the language requirement, and that's due primarily because the amount of time it would take to become a civil affairs officer would be about 2 years, and we just don't have the time or the bandwidth as most reserve officers don't, or reserve NCOs and officers don't have the time to do that.
Yeah, but the language, I think you bring out like reserve. As a reserve officer, I did that for a little bit as well. You bring you have policemen. You talked about before. You have teachers. You have all these kind of people. You bring like not to knock the active duty, but an active duty, 18-year civil affairs officers done that. They've been in the military for 18 years, whereas a civil affairs officer may have, they may be a teacher. There's some other skills they bring to it other than just being able to speak whatever language in a theater, and I think that's pretty admirable. I mean, I was shocked again. Like, what percentage of I think the civil affairs? What percentage of civil affairs is reserves?
It's about 80%.
What is it?
Yeah, it's about 80%.
Yes, it's
pretty
reserve,
high.
right?
It's very high.
Yeah, that's what.
And I'll tell you, I'll give you two examples. And I know we're kind of short on time, but the two things are one is the person that built the entire accounting structure for Afghanistan was an Army Reserve civil affairs officer, brought that skill set from his civilian job. And then the other one that negotiated with the Taliban in Qatar is actually a guy in my unit. And so helped negotiate that piece. And he's a Department of Justice lawyer, phenomenal lawyer. And so he helped negotiate that based off his skill set, not on his rank. I mean, he was a major. But really, sat across all that whole thing with Bergdog and all, and right, wrong, or indifferent, however you want to say it, but it was part of that whole process.
Right.
It's incredible. So it's the whole gamut from high echelon all the way down there to like building wells for some village.
No, I mean, I think I was excited to know when Genty told me that he came in there and found out you were a civil affairs officer. I was like, it played an important role in my time when I was deployed. And I remember like everywhere we went, we were together with one of them. And it was funny. Like I said, it was a branch of the military we didn't even know really. Yeah. We knew it existed, but what the fuck are they doing for us? And it was pretty amazing. I think they've done some great things to keep a lot of people alive. I mean, there's really a lot of things that I really truly believe that from the bottom of my heart, and like it's a branch. Like when I actually got a active duty and went to Dallas, there's a civil affairs unit And I saw that and I'm like, I just want to keep jumping. I'm like, this is perfect. And I remember telling my wife, I was like, I'm going to join the civil affairs unit. And my wife was like, no, you're not. And I'm like, why are you talking? She's like, they deploy all the time.
Yeah, they do.
She remembers that from Bragg. And I was like, damn it, you're right. But at the time, you wanted to be back in the fight. You want to do that. It was like,
yeah, and
it's an important mission.
And we're continually deploying people. Matter of fact, we're sending people out in, next month to Western Africa, several different countries. So yeah,
it's a real mission. I mean,
it is a real mission.
It's like, I mean, like not here I'm telling you that, but it is like if you talk to a lot of people that came across those, it's like one of the people that I honestly feel like they kept us safe. And a lot of times when we didn't know what we were, you know what I mean? We were poking the bear, or like, you know,
and they were
shaking the hive. And that was that one person that was like, maybe we don't need to do this. And I thank all your civil affairs brothers and sisters that do that. So it's pretty amazing. So I think it comes down to the crappy time of the podcast, I call it.
All right.
The shitty time. But the reason why we're here, and as you've seen, I updated the group's mission, I guess is the way to do it. But you know, if you've been watching now for a little, you know, under a year, but the goal is to end. My ultimate goal is to end veteran suicide. I mean, I know that's not a real goal, but we actually the goal is to, you know, lessen it and do that. So one of the most important things is to share veteran stories who've committed suicide. So we've come to that time to talk about that. And if you tuned in a few weeks ago, it's been 3 weeks ago, we talked about another a veteran who committed suicide. And today we're actually I was talking about, I'll be honest about this. This is like therapy for me. When I research people that have committed suicide, it's crazy. I talked to Jason, I think the most about it, but the hardest part of this podcast prep for me has been finding the veteran that we talk about at the end of the podcast. Sure. It's so hard. You wouldn't believe it. You know, veterans commit suicide at an astronomical rate, and then the families circle the wagons, get protective, and it's really hard to find out anything about that person. And I understand that. And maybe I'm being wrong about this, but and to tell people, but whatever a veteran commits suicide, it's a bad decision. We talked about it, but like, please honor them. They served the country. You should be proud of what they did. They made one bad decision. That's it. So it's just getting harder and harder for me. And as I go through, I'm always trying to connect to something, you know, like I was trying to find like a civil affairs person that, you know, like that's the hardest part for me. Everything else goes really fast. And then it gets even harder when you don't drink during the week. I made that pact after the years, which makes it, and this one is probably the most painful for me is in December, the last episode, I think was December 22nd. And we talked about this guy's brother. That was the Patriot we honored, was the guy we're about to talk about, his brother. So his brother, Stephen. So tonight we're going to talk about his brother, Alan, who committed suicide. And so tonight we'll honor U.S. Army Major Alan E. Coley, 39 years old. Alan took his life on September 7th, 2017 in Houston, Texas, 10 years after his brother, Specialist Stephen Coley, took his life. Alan was born on September 26, 1978, and graduated from Canyon High School in 1996. He graduated from Cornell University. Remember, we talked about people that are doing pretty impressive things. Like, this is a smart dude, Cornell University, and was commissioned into the U.S. Army Reserves. During his time in the Army, he deployed to Iraq, Uganda, and El Salvador. In between those deployments, Alan earned his law degree from the University of Michigan Law School. That's pretty impressive. Yeah. Alan was a 20-year veteran that struggled with losing his friends and obviously losing his brother, and unfortunately tried to handle it alone. He was concerned about getting treatment and how that would affect his career, both civilian and military. According to his father, Alan was tortured after Stephen. He could not reach an understanding about losing his baby brother. Alan is survived by his wife, Mauricia, his two daughters, mother and father, Ed and Catherine Coley, and his siblings, Melissa, Carolyn, James, and Matthew. As we said before, if you or someone you know may be considering suicide, you can always call me. anybody that you think will help you, but you definitely need to contact the Veterans Crisis Hotline at 988 or 1-800-273-8255. Press 1 or text 838-255. And this is like the hardest thing to talk about, a veteran whose brother 10 years early committed suicide, and one of the things that still plagues a lot of veterans of looking for help and trying to do this on your own. You can't do this on your own if you're struggling. Reach out to somebody. Don't be a statistic. That's I can't even get that out. But I want to thank you for coming on. Before we do that, before we go to the last quote, I've been trying to approach some different local places here as we do this. But one of the places I want to talk about locally is, if you need help, I've been watching Yellowstone. I think there's nothing but cooler than to get on a horse. Been on a horse like 2 or 3 times, like riding around, be like Rip. We got the beer going, but everyone should, to be honest with you, but there's a lot of things that help. I mean, and whatever helps to do that. But there's one of our listeners that actually sent me some information on a local group. It's the Heart of Warrior Farm, which is a nonprofit organization that's located in Granville, Ohio. They welcome all veterans and service members from all branches to join them on the farm to facilitate healing through the equine interaction, fellowship, and other things on the farm. I don't know if that's I was reading that. I'm like, are they going to put me to work on the farm, doing farm work, which is not a bad thing, right? I mean, working on the farm is all kind of cool. But I need to be able to ride the horse. That's all I'm saying. But they actually they do stuff for special needs children, all kinds of other things. But they actually do a Veterans Night, which is the second Friday of every month from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. So that's 1800 to 20 p.m. 1800 to 2000 to you.
So,
you sent something to me in a text that I didn't. In case I forgot how to do that. In case I forgot how to do that, but I just want to make sure I got that. If you have any questions about that, actually go to their website, go to their Facebook group, sign up. But they can be contacted at 614-604-4665 or at heartofwarriorsfarm@gmail.com or at their Facebook site, which is a post will be coming up here, I think, in the next 30 minutes or so. But definitely, if you're local here, one of the things I looked at is we definitely – in the Columbus area need to support this a little bit. I looked last night and there's 2 or 3 people supporting it. We need to get out there and do that. We can get our inner rip on, I think. So I think one of these Friday nights, I think Pours with Patriots might have to go out there, see Jason ride a horse, shovel some shit. It'll be some good stuff.
I can do it.
I can do it all. It's gonna be fun stuff. But I do want to thank you for coming on, Charles.
Appreciate it.
I know he's our most serious person we've had on. Non-drinking, making me feel like we're breaking the rules, but
it'll be all right.
But thanks for coming on. Thanks for sharing your story.
I appreciate it.
He's doing great things. And so how much longer until you get off the merry-go-round?
I think we're looking at June, July time frame will be my command tenure ends. And so they always say the best days and the worst days, or the best days of command are your first day and your last day.
He was talking about earlier about if you've ever changed command. I got it. Josh is on it all the time. I was I was going to forget real quick. I'm like, there's no way I'm forgetting that quote. I mean, it's great, but it's great.
Biggest honor I've ever done.
Your girlfriend's shaking her leg, find out she doesn't want to PCS to Nova Scotia,
Hawaii.
I don't think they have her, her company's out that way. But I do want to thank you for coming on. I do want to thank you for sharing your story.
Appreciate it.
And it's great to meet you. I didn't even meet you. I just
No, hey, it's been an honor, and I appreciate all you do for veterans, especially for veteran suicide, and recognizing that and broadcasting that.
I'm trying. So we're gonna go with the final quote before we end.
All right.
Episode 23, the first episode of season 2. It's gonna be an airborne quote. He was talking shit about the 82nd Airborne Division. I can't believe it, but we're gonna go with the man, the myth, the legend. General James Gavin.
Yep.
Show me a man who will jump out of an airplane, and I'll show you a man who will fight. And 2022, woman, man, it's the same thing. It's interchangeable, but it's the truth. It's the truth. It's going on. That's a quote. I'm not making a joke about it, but that's from the 40s. But literally today,
yeah,
men and women are jumping out of their crap. But That's a quote that means the world. So you're talking about the 82nd. There's no way the civil affairs guys are jumping more than the 82nd.
I got to bust the 82nd chops.
But thanks for coming on. I
Appreciate
appreciate it. And we'll see you actually in a week for episode 24.
Sounds good.
Thank you, everybody. Have
All right.
a good night.
Appreciate it, Scheck.